Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a world so cold that your understanding of winter will feel like a pleasant spring afternoon. Picture this, you're standing in Yakutia, Siberia, where the air itself feels like it's trying to kill you. The thermometer reads minus 71 degrees Celsius. That's minus 95.8 degrees Fahrenheit for my American friends. And you've just been told it's your turn to clean the outhouse. Yes, the outdoor toilet. The one that's 50 meters from your house. The one where human waste has transformed into bizarre frozen sculptures that would make modern art galleries weep with envy. You're probably thinking, why would anyone live here? Fair question. But roughly 1 million people call the Sakha Republic home, and they've been thriving in these conditions for centuries. They've learned to laugh at temperatures that would make Antarctic researchers nervous. They've mastered the art of survival in a place where the ground stays frozen year-round. Permafrost that goes down 1,500 meters in some places, deeper than 4 Empire State Buildings stacked on top of each other. And yes, they've figured out how to maintain outdoor toilets when indoor plumbing is basically a fever dream. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is for you right now. Are you in sunny California at 10 p.m.? Rainy London at 6 a.m.? I love seeing how this community spans the globe, all of us connected by curiosity and the strange comfort of learning about places we'll probably never visit, at least not in winter. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you need to understand about Yakutia is that it exists in defiance of every comfortable assumption you have about habitability. This isn't just cold. This is the kind of cold that creates optical phenomena. Diamond dust floating in the air, ice crystals catching moonlight and creating pillars of light that shoot into the sky. The locals call these light pillars sundogs, even though they appear at night, because in deep winter, the sun itself is a rare visitor, showing up for maybe 3 hours a day and barely cresting the horizon. You're bundled in layers upon layers. Reindeer fur closest to your skin because it's hollow-haired and traps warmth like nothing synthetic ever could. The indigenous Sakha people figured this out thousands of years ago, and modern science finally caught up in the 1970s when researchers examined reindeer hair under microscopes and discovered the secret. Each hair is a tiny insulated tube. Over that, you've got wool, then wind-resistant outer layers made from treated leather or modern synthetic fabrics that crinkle when you move, already stiffening in the cold. Your face is wrapped in a scarf, but you've left a small gap for your eyes and nose because completely covering your breathing passages leads to dangerous moisture buildup. Your breath condenses, freezes, and creates an ice mask that can cause frostbite against your own skin. It's one of those cruel ironies of extreme cold. Your body's own warmth becomes a weapon against you if you're not careful. The village around you looks like something from another planet. Houses are built on stilts, meter-high wooden or concrete pillars that keep the living spaces elevated above the permafrost. If you built directly on the ground, your home's heat would melt the frozen earth beneath it, and your house would sink, tilt, and eventually collapse into the mud. So every building perches above the land like a bird that refuses to fully land, connected to the earth only through these artificial legs. Smoke rises from chimneys in perfectly vertical columns. There's no wind tonight, which is both a blessing and a curse. Wind would make the cold unbearable, but it would also disperse the ice fog that's starting to form. Ice fog is exactly what it sounds like. Microscopic ice crystals suspended in the air, created when moisture from chimneys, breath, and even car exhaust, for those wealthy enough to own cars that still run in this cold, instantly freezes and hangs in the atmosphere. It creates an eerie, glowing haze around every light source, turning street lamps into fuzzy orbs of yellow and making the world feel even more alien. You can hear the village despite the late hour. Wood creaking, not from wind, but from the cold itself making timber contract and groan. Dogs barking in the distance, Yakutian lycus, bred for centuries to survive this climate. Their double coats so thick they actually prefer sleeping outside even in this weather. And underneath it all, a sound that's hard to describe. A faint crackling, almost like Rice Krispies in milk, which is the sound of ice crystals forming in the air around you, on every surface, in every tiny space where moisture exists. Your breath is visible, obviously, But it's not the normal white puff you see in milder cold. This is something more dramatic. Your exhalation crystallizes so fast that it makes a faint tinkling sound as ice particles form and fall. The locals call this the whisper of stars. You've been warned not to take deep breaths through your mouth. At this temperature, the cold air can damage your lungs, literally freezing the delicate tissues inside your respiratory system. So you breathe shallowly through your nose, letting your nasal passages warm the air somewhat before it reaches your lungs. The outhouse is visible from here, a small wooden structure that looks deceptively quaint, almost charming in the moonlight. It's painted a faded blue, or at least it was once. Now it's mostly weathered wood with patches of color clinging to the grain. There's a small crescent moon carved into the door, a traditional design that actually serves a practical purpose. Ventilation. Though right now, you're pretty sure ventilation is the least of your concerns. You've been dreading this task for days. Everyone in the household takes turns, and tonight is your night. There's no getting out of it. The outhouse needs maintenance, especially in winter when everything freezes solid within hours of deposition. If you let it go too long, you end up with a situation that's exponentially worse, a monument of frozen waste that requires actual construction tools to address. Better to deal with it regularly, even if regularly means exposing yourself to potentially lethal cold. Your host family, you're staying with them as part of a cultural exchange program, because apparently you thought experiencing Yakutian winter would be educational, has given you the tools. There's a metal scraper, though they've warned you that metal becomes brittle in extreme cold and can shatter if you're too aggressive. There's a wooden paddle, which sounds medieval but is actually more reliable in these conditions. And there's a bucket of hot water mixed with salt, which lowers the freezing point and can help melt ice, at least temporarily. The grandmother of the family, a woman in her 70s who's lived through 70-plus Yakutian winters, has given you advice in broken Russian. You don't speak Saka, the indigenous language, and your Russian is barely functional, but you understood the important bits through her gestures and demonstrations. Move fast, but don't rush. Rushing makes you breathe hard, and hard breathing in this cold is dangerous. Don't touch metal with bare skin, ever. And if you start to lose feeling in your extremities, get inside immediately. Frostbite happens faster than you think. She also told you, with a laugh that showed more gaps than teeth, that cleaning the outhouse builds character. In Soviet times, she said, city people came here thinking they were tough. The outhouse humbled them all. You suspect she's understating it for entertainment value. Historians note that the Saka people, also known as the Yakuts, migrated to this region around the 13th and 14th centuries, moving north from areas around Lake Baikal. Why anyone would voluntarily migrate to one of the coldest inhabited places on Earth remains a subject of scholarly debate. Some researchers suggest they were pushed north by conflicts with other groups. Others argue they were following reindeer herds and gradually adapted to the extreme conditions. What's not debated is their remarkable success. They developed a culture so well adapted to the cold that they not only survived but created a rich civilization with distinctive art, music, epic poetry, and social structures that persist to this day. The Saka also domesticated horses in these conditions, which seems impossible until you see it. Yakutian horses are small, stocky, and so cold adapted that they can survive winter without shelter, digging through snow to find grass underneath. They develop winter coats so thick they look like they're wearing fur blankets. And yes, people still ride them in winter, though you'd need significant vodka courage to try it yourself at minus 71 degrees Celsius. Actually, scratch that, vodka freezes at around minus 27 degrees Celsius, so at this temperature you could leave a bottle outside and pour it over ice cream. Well, you could if ice cream didn't turn into a literal rock in these conditions. You check your watch, a mechanical one, because electronic devices are unreliable in extreme cold, batteries dying in minutes. It's 11:47 p.m. The family goes to bed early and rises early, following the limited daylight hours. You've timed this for late night because there's a certain dignity in suffering without an audience. The moon is full, which helps. Yakutia in winter is often illuminated more by moon and stars than by the sun. On clear nights like this, with no light pollution from any nearby cities, the capital, Yakutsk, is over 200 kilometers away. The stars are so bright and numerous they look fake, like someone went overboard with a glitter shaker. The Milky Way is a clear band across the sky, and you can see why ancient peoples imagined it as a river or a road. Up here, it genuinely looks like a path you could walk. But you're not stargazing tonight. You're preparing for battle with frozen human waste, which is definitely not what you imagined when you signed up for this cultural exchange. The program brochure mentioned authentic indigenous experiences and challenging yourself in extreme environments. But somehow you pictured something more noble, learning to hunt, maybe, or mastering throat singing. Not this. You take a final deep breath through your nose, adjust your layers, and pick up the tools. The metal scraper is already so cold it would stick to your skin if you touched it barehanded. The wooden paddle feels slightly less dangerous. The bucket of hot salt water is steaming, the vapor rising and immediately crystallizing in the air, creating a small localized ice fog around the bucket. One of the household dogs, a massive Laika named something that sounds like Karak, watches you from his spot near the house. He's curled in a ball, nose tucked under his tail, looking comfortable in a way that makes you jealous. His eyes follow you with what you interpret as sympathy, or maybe amusement. It's hard to tell with dogs. The distance to the outhouse is 50 meters. In normal conditions, that's nothing, a 30-second walk. Here, it's an expedition. At this temperature, exposed skin can develop frostbite in less than 2 minutes. Your face is mostly covered, but your eyes are exposed because you need to see where you're going. You'll feel them start to sting if you're out too long. You step off the porch, and the snow under your boots makes a sound like styrofoam squeaking. That's because at this temperature, snow has a different crystal structure. The flakes are harder, sharper, and they compact differently under pressure. Each step sounds unnaturally loud in the still night air. The cold hits you differently than you expected. It's not just a sensation of chilliness that gradually increases. It's immediate and aggressive, like something physical pressing against every exposed surface, searching for a way in. Your eyes water involuntarily, a protective reflex, and you feel the tears start to freeze on your eyelashes. Halfway to the outhouse, you understand why the grandmother said not to rush. Your breathing has already quickened, and each breath stings your nasal passages. You force yourself to slow down, to take smaller, shallower breaths. The frozen air seems to resist entering your lungs, like breathing something solid rather than gas. The outhouse door is frozen shut, of course. Everything is frozen shut in Yakutia. You set down the bucket and tools and pull on the door with both hands. It doesn't budge. You pull harder, bracing your foot against the frame. Something cracks. You hope it's ice and not wood, and the door swings open with a groan that echoes across the village. The smell hits you immediately, which is paradoxical because you're about to learn one of the strange truths of extreme cold. Odors don't travel well when everything is frozen. What you're smelling is from earlier today when someone used the outhouse during the relatively warmer afternoon hours, a balmy -35 degrees Celsius. But even that limited smell is enough to make you grateful for the cold. You cannot imagine what this place smells like in summer. You shine your flashlight inside, and the beam reveals your task. The frozen waste has accumulated into abstract formations that rise from the pit below like stalagmites in a cave. Some are nearly reaching the seat level. The walls are covered in frost patterns, beautiful and intricate, nature decorating the inside of a toilet with the same artistic care it applies to window panes. There's something absurd about finding beauty here, but you can't help it. The ice crystals catch your flashlight beam and sparkle like diamonds. This is where your real work begins. This is where you'll learn that maintaining basic human dignity in extreme environments requires effort that most people never have to consider. In your comfortable home, wherever that is, the toilet flushes and the waste disappears into some underground system you never think about. Here, at -71 degrees Celsius, at the edge of human habitability, nothing is automatic. Everything is earned through cold, discomfort, and the kind of work that makes you appreciate things you previously took for granted. You reach for the wooden paddle, and as you do, you can hear the grandmother's voice in your head. The outhouse builds character. You're about to find out just how much. The Saka people didn't just randomly decide to build outhouses and hope for the best when they settled in Yakutia centuries ago. What you're looking at right now, this small wooden structure that seems so simple, is actually the result of generations of engineering refinement, trial and error, and intimate knowledge of what happens to materials and biology when the thermometer plunges to temperatures that would make most of humanity simply give up and move somewhere reasonable. The first thing you notice, now that you're examining the structure more carefully, is that this outhouse isn't built directly on the ground. Like the houses, it sits on short posts driven deep into the permafrost. This elevation serves multiple purposes, and you're about to appreciate every single one of them. First, it creates an air gap underneath that provides some insulation. Counterintuitive, perhaps, but that pocket of trapped air actually helps moderate the temperature slightly. More importantly, it prevents the waste pit from being in direct contact with the permafrost, which would create an immediate freezing situation that would be impossible to manage. The pit itself is a marvel of cold weather engineering. It's been dug during the brief summer months when the top layer of ground, the active layer, thaws to a depth of maybe a meter or two. Below that, it's permafrost all the way down, frozen solid for thousands of years. Some of that permafrost contains the preserved remains of woolly mammoths. Their meat's still fresh enough that dogs have eaten it and survived. You try not to think too hard about the fact that you're essentially dealing with waste management on top of an ancient deep freeze that contains extinct megafauna. The pit is lined with wood, not to be fancy, but because wood provides some insulation and prevents the pit from collapsing inward. In summer, there's limited decomposition, though nowhere near what would happen in warmer climates. Bacteria and other decomposers slow down dramatically as temperatures drop, and at this temperature, biological processes have essentially stopped completely. What you're dealing with isn't really waste decomposing. It's waste being cryogenically preserved, layer by layer, like a disgusting archaeological record of the household's digestive history. The walls of the outhouse are double-layered. You can see this now, examining them with your flashlight. There's an inner wall and an outer wall with a gap between them, and that gap is packed with dried grass, sawdust, and old clothing. This isn't just recycling, it's survival-grade insulation. The Saka have known for centuries what modern builders charge thousands of dollars to explain. Trapped air is one of the best insulators available. The grass and sawdust create thousands of tiny air pockets that slow heat transfer, meaning the interior of the outhouse stays slightly, and we're talking only slightly, less frigid than the outside air. The roof is steeply angled, and you understand why when you see the accumulated snow and frost on it. A flat roof would collapse under the weight. Snow in Yakutia isn't the fluffy, light stuff you might get in milder climates. It falls dry and granular, almost like sand, and it accumulates month after month because it never melts. By the end of winter, some roofs are supporting hundreds of kilograms of accumulated snow and ice. The steep angle helps some of it slide off, though even then, residents have to climb up periodically and clear the roofs before the weight becomes structural dangerous. The door, now hanging open and letting in the -71 degrees Celsius air like an invitation to hypothermia, is also engineered with more thought than you initially realized. It's thick, made from multiple planks joined together, and it hangs on leather hinges rather than metal ones. This is genius in its simplicity. Metal hinges would contract in the cold, become brittle, and eventually snap. Leather remains somewhat flexible even in extreme cold, especially if it's been treated with animal fat. The Saka have been using this technique for centuries, long before metallurgy became common in the region. That crescent moon carved into the door isn't just decorative, as you suspected earlier. It provides ventilation, which is crucial for several reasons. First, it prevents the buildup of dangerous gases, methane and hydrogen sulfide, that can accumulate in enclosed spaces where waste is stored. Second, it allows some air circulation, which paradoxically helps manage moisture. Yes, even at -71 degrees Celsius, there's moisture to manage. When warm human bodies enter this space, they bring water vapor with them, in their breath, from their skin, even from the waste itself before it freezes. That moisture needs somewhere to go, or it will condense on every surface and create layers of ice that make the space progressively smaller and more difficult to use. Speaking of which, you notice that the walls inside are indeed covered in elaborate frost patterns. These aren't decorative, they're diagnostic. The grandmother explained this to you earlier, though you only half understood at the time. The patterns tell you how air is moving through the space, where moisture is accumulating, and where the temperature differentials are greatest. Those beautiful fern-like crystal formations growing on the eastern wall? They indicate that moisture-laden air is hitting the coldest surface and depositing ice there. Over the course of winter, the family will monitor these patterns and occasionally scrape them off before they become too thick. The seat itself is made of wood, never plastic, never metal. The host family's grandfather demonstrated this principle to you during your first day by taking a metal spoon and a wooden spoon outside. After a few minutes in the cold, he asked you to touch each one with your tongue. You were smart enough to refuse, but he did it himself, briefly. The wooden spoon was fine, uncomfortable, but fine. The metal spoon would have instantly bonded to his tongue through freeze welding, potentially ripping off skin when removed. People have lost lips, tongues, and fingertips this way, making the mistake of touching metal without gloves or putting metal objects in their mouths in extreme cold. So the toilet seat is wood, sanded smooth and worn from years of use. It's been treated with animal fat, probably seal oil, brought in from the coast, which helps prevent moisture absorption and keeps the wood from cracking in the temperature extremes. The Saka have known about this treatment for generations, though Western scientists didn't study the antimicrobial and protective properties of seal oil until the late 20th century. The seat has two holes, not for companionship, but for practicality. One is the main hole positioned over the deepest part of the pit. The second, smaller hole is offset to one side and slightly forward. This is for children and for situations where the main pit is getting too full and frozen waste has built up to concerning levels. It's a backup system, essentially, and it speaks to the long-term thinking required to survive here. You can't just call a plumber when things go wrong. You can't drive to the hardware store for supplies. Everything has to be planned, redundant, and maintainable with whatever resources are locally available. Underneath the seat, the pit extends down about 2 meters. You can't see the bottom in the darkness, even with your flashlight. The family empties it once a year, during the brief summer thaw, which is a process you've been told about but don't fully want to imagine. The frozen waste is actually removed in chunks, like excavating ice, because that's essentially what it is, and transported to a designated area far from the village where it's allowed to thaw and decompose over the summer months. The permafrost makes traditional septic systems impossible. You can't have drain fields or leach fields when the ground never thaws below 1 meter or 2. Historians still argue whether the Saka originally used outhouses or if they adopted the concept from Russian colonizers who arrived in the 17th century. Some evidence suggests that traditional Saka had different waste management systems, possibly involving sealed containers that could be kept inside dwellings during the worst of winter and emptied during more moderate weather. The Russian Orthodox Church, which arrived with colonization, had strong ideas about sanitation and the separation of living spaces from waste, which may have influenced the adoption of the outhouse model. But the Saka took that basic Russian concept, a small structure with a pit beneath it, and adapted it for conditions the Russians had never imagined. Standard Russian outhouses, built for Siberian climates that were merely cold rather than apocalyptically cold, would fail completely in Yakutia. The Saka added the insulation, the elevated foundation, the leather hinges, the fat-treated wooden seats, and dozens of other small modifications that transformed a simple structure into something that could actually function at the edge of habitability. You notice small details now that you're really looking. There are hooks on the wall, not metal but carved from antler, where cleaning tools hang when not in use. There's a small shelf that holds a container of wood ash, which is sprinkled into the pit after each use. The ash serves multiple functions. It absorbs some moisture, provides a layer of insulation over fresh deposits, helps control odors during warmer periods, and eventually aids decomposition when things thaw in summer. The floor is made of thick planks that show where patterns, darker areas where countless feet have stood over the years. The wood has been treated with something that makes it water-resistant, probably more seal oil or perhaps a mixture of oils and resins that the Saka have been using since before written records. There are no gaps between the planks. Everything is fitted tightly because gaps would let cold air shoot up from below, creating drafts that would make the space unusable. On one wall, barely visible in the dim light, there are markings carved into the wood. You recognize some Cyrillic letters, Russian script, mixed with symbols you don't understand. These are probably in the Saka language, which has its own distinct alphabet based on Cyrillic but with additional letters for sounds that don't exist in Russian. The markings might be names, dates, or possibly jokes. You know from talking to the grandmother that outhouse humor is a real thing here, a way of making light of an uncomfortable necessity. She'd shown you a book of traditional Saka sayings, and several of them referenced outhouses in ways that were probably hilarious if you understood the cultural context. The structure sways slightly when you shift your weight, which startles you until you realize this is intentional. A rigid structure would crack and fail under the stress of constant temperature cycling. From the relatively warm interior when someone's using it to the brutal exterior cold, day after day, month after month. The slight flexibility allows the wood to expand and contract without splitting. It's engineering that doesn't look like engineering, folk wisdom that preceded physics textbooks by centuries. You also notice that the outhouse is positioned strategically relative to the main house. It's downwind of the prevailing wind direction. In summer, when smells are an issue, the breeze carries odors away from the dwelling. It's close enough to reach without excessive exposure to cold, but far enough that there's psychological separation. 50 meters is apparently the sweet spot, refined over generations of experience. Near the base of one wall, there's a small opening, more ventilation, but also something else. In summer, the grandmother explained, sparrows sometimes nest in these spaces. They're tolerated, even encouraged, because they eat insects that might otherwise become problems. It's a small example of the Saka philosophy of living in balance with their environment rather than trying to dominate it. Even an outhouse becomes part of an ecosystem, providing shelter for birds and maintaining its own small community of adapted organisms. There's also a practical consideration you hadn't thought about. This structure has to withstand not just cold, but massive temperature swings. Summer highs can reach 30 degrees Celsius, yes, 30 above, which means the outhouse experiences temperature variations of more than 100 degrees Celsius over the course of a year. That's the temperature difference between boiling water and liquid nitrogen. Wood handles this better than almost any other building material. It expands and contracts, but gradually and predictably. Modern materials, plastics, and composites would fail completely under this kind of stress. The construction details reveal something deeper about Saka culture. An obsessive attention to functionality over aesthetics, but without sacrificing beauty entirely. The structure is weathered but not neglected. The paint may be faded, but the underlying wood is sound. The carvings on the door and the frost patterns inside create unintentional art. There's a dignity in this approach, a respect for the structure's purpose and the harsh environment it serves. You also realize, standing here in the doorway with your tools, that this outhouse represents a kind of philosophical stance. In most of the modern world, people deal with waste by making it invisible, flush and forget. Here, that's not possible. The cold preserves everything, makes it impossible to ignore. The Saka have had to develop a relationship with waste management that's honest and practical. There's no pretending it doesn't exist, no hiding it away in underground systems that someone else maintains. Every household deals with its own waste, understands the work involved, and appreciates the engineering required to make it manageable. This isn't romantic primitivism, it's practical adaptation. Given the choice, many Saka would probably prefer modern plumbing. In Yakutsk, the regional capital, buildings do have indoor plumbing, though it requires extensive engineering to prevent pipes from freezing. Water and sewage lines are built above ground and heavily insulated, running along building exteriors like industrial artwork. But in rural villages, spread across vast distances in the coldest inhabited region on Earth, traditional methods persist because they work, they're maintainable with local resources, and they've been refined over centuries to handle conditions that would make modern systems fail catastrophically. You take a deep breath of the frigid air, carefully, through your nose, and consider your task. You're about to engage in maintenance work that connects you to generations of people who've done this same job in this same cold. The specific details of outhouse cleaning might not make it into history books, but this is how civilizations actually function in extreme environments, through unglamorous, repetitive, necessary work that keeps the basic machinery of life running. The frozen waste formations in the pit below aren't going to scrape themselves. The frost on the walls needs to be cleared. The ash container needs refilling. And you need to accomplish all of this before the cold penetrates your layers and starts causing real damage to your body. You adjust your grip on the wooden paddle and step fully inside, pulling the door closed behind you to trap what little warmth your body will generate. The crescent moon cutout lets in a shaft of moonlight, illuminating the frost crystals and making them sparkle like stars. Time to build some character. Before you can even think about approaching those frozen waste monuments with your paddle and scraper, you need to prepare your body for what's essentially a controlled exposure to conditions that can kill you. This isn't hyperbole. At minus 71 degrees Celsius, you're operating in temperatures lower than the surface of Mars on an average day. The human body wasn't designed for this, which means every system you've got is going to protest, and you need to outsmart your own biology to survive the next 30 minutes. You're already wearing multiple layers, but now that you're standing still inside the outhouse rather than moving, you need to think about heat management differently. When you were walking from the house, your body was generating warmth through movement. Now, standing relatively still while you work, your metabolic heat production drops significantly. Your core temperature is normally around 37 degrees Celsius, and your body will fight desperately to maintain that, but it's fighting against an environment that's 108 degrees colder. That's not a battle your body can win for long without help. The innermost layer against your skin is that reindeer fur the grandmother insisted you wear. You initially thought this was quaint traditionalism, but you've learned it's pure science. Reindeer hair is hollow, each individual hair is essentially a tiny vacuum-sealed tube, and vacuum is one of the best insulators known to physics. The fur also wicks moisture away from your skin, which is crucial because wet skin in this cold means frostbite waiting to happen. Your own sweat becomes your enemy in extreme cold. Over the reindeer fur, you're wearing wool, thick, itchy, genuine wool that probably came from sheep raised somewhere considerably warmer than here. Wool retains its insulating properties even when damp, unlike cotton, which the locals treat like it's actively poisonous. Cotton kills is what the grandfather told you, and he wasn't being poetic. Cotton absorbs moisture and loses all insulating value when wet, turning into a heat-sucking second skin that can cause hypothermia even in moderately cold conditions. In Yakutia, wearing cotton as a base layer is essentially suicide by wardrobe choice. Your outer layer is wind-resistant, either treated leather or modern synthetic fabric, depending on which pieces you've borrowed from the family's extensive collection of survival gear. This layer's job is to prevent wind from penetrating to the insulated layers beneath. Wind chill at these temperatures is almost academic. The air is so cold that wind just makes an already lethal situation slightly more lethal slightly faster. But still, blocking air movement is crucial. Your hands are covered in mittens, not gloves, because fingers together stay warmer than fingers separated. The mittens are also layered, thin wool liner gloves inside thick fur mittens. You can remove the outer mittens briefly for fine motor tasks, but your fingers will start going numb within 30 seconds of exposure. The family has warned you about this repeatedly. Once you lose feeling in your fingers, you've got maybe another minute before tissue damage begins. Frostbite isn't like a gradual sunburn. It's binary. 1 minute your tissue is alive, the next minute ice crystals are forming inside your cells, rupturing cell walls, and causing damage that may be permanent. Your feet are in boots, Valenki traditional Russian felt boots that look ridiculous and feel miraculous. They're made from densely felted wool, often with multiple layers compressed together, and they're sized large, so you can wear thick socks inside them. The grandfather showed you his boots, which have been resoled and repaired dozens of times. The felt uppers are decades old, treated with seal oil and fish oil to make them water-resistant. Inside, he wears socks made from dog hair, yes, hair combed from those Leica dogs you saw earlier. Dog hair, like reindeer hair, has excellent insulating properties, and in a subsistence culture, every available resource gets used. Your face is wrapped in a scarf made from rabbit fur, soft and dense, covering everything except your eyes and a small opening for your nose and mouth. This is where things get tricky because you need to breathe, but breathing at minus 71 degrees Celsius requires technique. Each breath you take in warms from minus 71 degrees Celsius to body temperature, 37 degrees Celsius. Inside your respiratory system, that's a 108-degree temperature increase, happening in the space of seconds, powered by your body's heat. Your nasal passages, throat, and lungs are doing enormous work just to process the air you need to stay alive. You've been taught to breathe shallowly through your nose, letting your nasal passages warm the air as much as possible before it reaches your lungs. Deep breaths through your mouth, the kind you take naturally when exerting yourself, can cause the delicate tissues in your lungs to freeze, a condition that can lead to pulmonary edema and death. Researchers studying extreme cold exposure have documented cases where people's lungs essentially develop ice burns on the interior surfaces, though these studies were typically done at temperatures warmer than what you're experiencing now. There's a persistent myth about vodka keeping you warm in extreme cold, and you need to ignore that myth completely if you want to survive this experience. The grandfather has strong opinions about this, delivered in Russian with enough cognates that you understood perfectly. Stupid city people drink vodka, feel warm, die in snow. Vodka makes blood vessels expand, makes you lose heat faster, makes you stupid when you need to be smart. He's absolutely right. Alcohol causes vasodilation. Your blood vessels expand, bringing warm blood closer to your skin surface, which creates a temporary sensation of warmth but actually increases heat loss to the environment. It also impairs judgment, and in conditions like this, good judgment is the difference between going inside with cold fingers and going inside with fingers that need to be amputated. The traditional Saka approach to extreme cold is sobriety, awareness, and respect for the environment's ability to kill you. What does help is having eaten properly before venturing out. Your body generates heat through metabolism, and that requires fuel. The dinner you had earlier, a stew made with horse meat, potatoes, onions, and enough fat to make a cardiologist weep, is now being converted into the heat that's keeping you alive. The Saka diet in winter is heavy on fat and protein because these nutrients provide sustained energy and heat production. The grandmother explained that in the old days, before imported foods became available, people would eat enormous quantities of fat during winter, raw frozen fish with seal oil, frozen horse meat with butter, milk so thick with cream it was more solid than liquid. Modern nutritionists studying circumpolar peoples have found that they metabolize fat differently than populations from temperate climates. There's genetic adaptation at work, thousands of years of natural selection favoring people whose bodies efficiently convert dietary fat into heat. Historians still argue whether this adaptation occurred after the Saka moved to Yakutia or whether they were already adapted to extreme cold before they arrived, suggesting possible origins even farther north than current theories propose. Your breathing has started to create a small ice buildup on the inside of your scarf, right where the moisture from your exhalations hits the fabric and freezes. You can feel it, a gradually hardening crust forming around your mouth. This is normal and expected, but you need to monitor it because too much ice buildup can restrict breathing or cause the scarf to freeze to your skin. You adjust the fabric slightly, breaking off some of the ice, which tinkles to the floor like tiny bells. Your eyes are watering, a natural protective response to the cold and dry air. The tears want to freeze on your eyelashes, which would seal your eyes shut, so you blink frequently and resist the urge to rub them. The family has told you stories about people whose eyes froze open or shut during extended exposure, requiring careful thawing back indoors. The human eye is surprisingly vulnerable in extreme cold because it's wet, exposed, and difficult to insulate without blocking vision entirely. You can feel your body starting to shiver, small, involuntary muscle contractions that generate heat. This is your body's first-line defense against cold stress, and it's actually quite effective. Shivering can increase heat production by 4 or 5 times above resting levels. But it's also exhausting and burns through your energy reserves quickly. If you're out here long enough that you progress from small shivers to violent, uncontrollable shaking, that's a sign of moderate hypothermia and a warning that you need to get inside immediately. Your heart rate has increased slightly, another physiological response to cold stress. Your body is working harder to maintain core temperature, pumping blood more vigorously to keep vital organs warm. Blood flow to your extremities, fingers, toes, nose, ears, gets reduced as your body prioritizes the core. This is why frostbite happens in extremities first. Your body is essentially sacrificing your fingers to keep your heart and brain alive. It's a brutal but effective triage system that's kept mammals alive through ice ages. There's also a psychological component to preparing for this work. You need to stay calm and focused because panic increases breathing rate, which increases the volume of cold air your lungs must warm, which increases heat loss and makes everything worse. The Saka have traditionally used a kind of meditation or mental discipline when dealing with extreme cold, not the sitting cross-legged humming mantras kind of meditation, but a practical awareness of your body's signals and a deliberate control of your responses to them. The grandmother described it as listening to your body talk. Pain is information. Cold sensations are data. Your body is constantly communicating its status to you, and in extreme environments, ignoring those communications can be fatal. She told you about a Russian researcher who came to study Saka cold adaptation in the 1960s. A smart man, well-educated, but he ignored his body's warnings because he wanted to finish his observations. They found him the next morning, frozen solid, 50 meters from the research station, having become too hypothermic to walk the final distance to safety. You do a quick physical inventory. Toes. Can feel them, can wiggle them inside your boots. Good. Fingers. Slightly cold but responsive. Can still feel the wooden paddle's handle through your inner gloves. Good. Face. Uncomfortable but not numb. No pins and needles sensation that would indicate the beginning of frostbite. Good. Core warm enough, no uncontrollable shivering yet. You're operational, at least for now. The challenge is that you can't just rush through this task. Rushing makes you breathe harder, sweat more, and increases the risk of mistakes that could expose skin to metal or cause you to fall in the awkward confines of this small frozen space. But you also can't take too long because every minute out here is a minute of heat loss, bringing you closer to the point where your body can't maintain core temperature and hypothermia begins. The optimal strategy, as explained by multiple family members with the patience usually reserved for explaining things to small children, is methodical efficiency. Smooth movements, steady breathing, constant awareness of your body's status. Think of it like a spacewalk. You're in a hostile environment, you have limited time, and every action needs to be deliberate and correct. You've also learned some tricks that seem counterintuitive. For example, if your fingers start getting too cold, you're supposed to windmill your arms vigorously, using centrifugal force to push blood into your hands. This looks absurd and feels absurd, but it works, you've tested it. Similarly, if your feet are getting cold, you can stomp them or do small jumps, using muscle action to generate heat locally. But these tricks only work for so long. They're temporary measures that buy you time, not solutions to the fundamental problem of being a tropical adapted ape in an environment cold enough to freeze carbon dioxide. You think briefly about carbon dioxide, actually, because you remember reading that Mars's polar ice caps are partially made of frozen CO2 dry ice. At minus 71 degrees Celsius, you're only about 7 degrees away from the temperature at which carbon dioxide freezes at standard pressure. This isn't idle trivia. It's a reminder that you're operating in conditions more extreme than most places on Earth, in a temperature regime more commonly associated with other planets. The Saka have a saying the grandfather taught you. The cold is honest. It tells you exactly how strong you are. You didn't fully understand what he meant at the time, but standing here, preparing to clean frozen human waste while your body slowly loses heat to the environment, you think you're beginning to get it. There's no hiding from the cold, no faking competence. Either you can handle it or you can't, and the cold will reveal the truth with impartial precision. You take one more careful breath, feeling the cold air move through your nasal passages, and commit to the task. Your body is as prepared as it's going to be. Your layers are arranged correctly. You understand the warning signs of cold injury. You've got your tools: wooden paddle, metal scraper, to be used carefully, bucket of hot salt water, already cooling but still useful. The frozen waste formations in the pit are waiting, patient and eternal, preserved by cold that stopped bacterial decomposition weeks ago. They're not going anywhere. They've got all the time in the world. You don't. Your body is a heat engine running in deficit mode, burning calories to maintain temperature against an environment that wants to equalize you to minus 71 degrees Celsius. You position yourself carefully on the wooden floor, finding stable footing, and raise the paddle. The work begins now, and every second counts. Not because you're in immediate danger, not yet, but because the cold is accumulating in your body like debt, and eventually the bill comes due. Time to see what you're made of. The sprint from the house to the outhouse earlier felt manageable, almost anticlimactic in its brevity. But now, standing at the threshold with your bucket and tools, preparing to return to this small wooden structure after gathering additional supplies you forgot the first time, you understand that each journey across these 50 meters is its own expedition into hostile territory. The family has gone to sleep. You can see the main house is dark except for one small window where an oil lamp burns low, left on as a beacon for your return. That warm yellow glow looks impossibly distant, like a star you're trying to reach. You step off the porch again, and the cold wraps around you with renewed aggression. It's strange how the cold feels different each time you encounter it, like it's personally offended that you've survived previous exposures and is determined to finish the job this time. The snow squeaks beneath your boots with that distinctive styrofoam sound, each step announcing your presence to the silent village. In the distance, you hear a dog bark once, then silence. Even the dogs, adapted as they are, don't waste energy on prolonged barking in this temperature. The moon has moved slightly since your first trip, changing the shadows across the landscape. The houses on their stilts cast strange, elongated shadows that stretch across the snow like dark fingers. In this light, with the ice fog starting to thicken slightly, the village looks even more alien than before, a human settlement clinging to existence on a world that fundamentally doesn't want humans here. The Saka have a word for this that the grandmother taught you, sir, which roughly translates to the land spirit or the essence of place. She explained that Yakutia's sir is cold and indifferent, testing anyone who tries to live here, demanding respect and preparedness. Your breath crystallizes so quickly now that you can hear it, that faint tinkling sound of ice crystals forming in the air immediately in front of your face. It's beautiful and terrifying simultaneously, a reminder that your body's moisture is instantly transformed by this environment. You're exhaling water vapor at body temperature, and within microseconds it's becoming solid ice suspended in the air. The physics of phase transitions happening this rapidly right in front of your face is something most people never experience. 15 meters from the house, you feel your first doubt. Your fingers are already starting to lose sensation despite the mittens. Not numbness yet, just that preliminary stage where you become acutely aware of your fingers as separate entities, each one reporting its discomfort to your brain. You curl them into fists inside the mittens, creating small pockets of trapped warm air around them. This helps, but you know it's temporary. At 30 meters, you're halfway there, and you make the mistake of looking back at the house. That warm beacon of the oil lamp seems to be receding faster than you're approaching the outhouse. It's an optical illusion created by the ice fog and the moonlight, but it triggers something primal in your brain, the fear of being lost, of being caught between 2 points of safety with neither close enough to reach. Explorers in Antarctica have written about this sensation, the psychological weight of distance in extreme cold. Every meter feels like a kilometer when your body is screaming at you to find warmth immediately. You force yourself to look forward at the outhouse instead. Its silhouette is distinct against the lighter snow, that small peaked roof and the faint darker square of the crescent moon cutout in the door. It's occupied your thoughts for the past hour, but now it looks almost welcoming. At least it's shelter from the open air, some protection from the radiant heat loss to the infinite cold of the sky above. The sky, you notice, is performing. The aurora borealis has begun. Faint green curtains of light dancing across the northern horizon. In warmer places, people travel thousands of kilometers and spend thousands of dollars to see what you're seeing right now for free. But you can barely appreciate it because you're focused on moving forward, on maintaining your breathing rhythm, on not exposing any skin accidentally. The aurora is caused by solar particles hitting Earth's magnetic field, exciting atoms in the upper atmosphere. You remember this from school, but the technical explanation doesn't capture the eerie beauty of it, the way the lights seem to pulse and flow like something alive. Traditional Saka believed the aurora was spirits of the dead playing games in the sky, which seems more poetic than talking about magnetospheres and charged particles. The grandmother told you that her grandmother, your mental math makes that someone born in the late 1800s, would never go outside alone when the aurora was particularly active, believing it was bad luck. Whether that was genuine spiritual belief or practical wisdom disguised as superstition is unclear. Perhaps the aurora appears most strongly during certain atmospheric conditions that also bring dangerous cold or storms. Indigenous knowledge often contains practical survival information encoded in spiritual terms. At 40 meters, you can feel your heartbeat in your chest, faster than normal, your cardiovascular system working overtime to maintain core temperature. Your legs are doing the work of walking, generating some heat through muscle action, but it's not enough. The cold is winning, slowly but inevitably, extracting heat from your body faster than you can produce it. This is the fundamental equation of survival in extreme cold. heat production versus heat loss. When loss exceeds production, hypothermia begins. You're not there yet, not close, but the trajectory is clear. You think about the people who've died in cold like this, and there are more than you'd imagine. The Russian research station on the Yana River, not far from here, lost 3 researchers in the winter of 1953 when their generator failed and they couldn't maintain heat. They were found weeks later when the relief team arrived, frozen in their beds, having burned all their furniture and then succumbed to the cold in their sleep. The official Soviet report called it equipment failure, but locals say it was overconfidence. The researchers were from Moscow and didn't respect Yakutian winter enough. There are older stories too, from before Soviet times, when the Saka lived in smaller nomadic groups following reindeer herds. Entire families could be lost if they misjudged the weather or if illness struck during the coldest months. The historical record is sparse because Saka oral tradition focused on survival wisdom rather than tragic tales. But archaeologists have found evidence of settlements that were simply abandoned, presumably because everyone died. The harsh truth of living in extreme cold is that mistakes are often fatal, and bad luck can be equally deadly. At 45 meters, almost there now, you hear a cracking sound from the ice fog above you. Temperature differential causing ice crystals to fracture, or perhaps just the sound of extreme cold itself, something in the air contracting. It's loud enough to make you flinch, and flinching makes you breathe harder, which is exactly what you shouldn't do. You force yourself to slow down, to return to shallow nasal breathing, even though every instinct says to hurry. The outhouse is 5 meters away now. You can see the frost patterns on the door, illuminated by moonlight, intricate as lace. Up close, the structure looks more worn than you noticed before. There's a crack in one wall board that's been patched with tar or some kind of sealant. The patch has its own frost pattern growing on it, feather-like crystals extending from the edges. Everything out here gets decorated by ice eventually. You reach the door and fumble with it using your mittened hands. The leather hinges creak. Sound travels differently in this cold, sharper and clearer because the dense air conducts sound waves more efficiently. You pull the door open and step inside, and even though the interior is barely warmer than outside, maybe minus 68 degrees Celsius instead of minus 71 degrees Celsius, it feels like relief because you're out of the open air, sheltered from the vast radiant cold of the sky. You pull the door shut behind you and stand for a moment in the darkness, catching your breath. Your flashlight beam reveals the same scene as before. The frozen waste formations rising from the pit like stalagmites, the frost-covered walls, the wooden seat with its 2 holes. But now you notice other details you missed earlier. There are scratches on the walls, not the carved writing you saw before, but actual claw marks. Some animal, probably a wolverine or fox, tried to get in here at some point, perhaps attracted by smells during a warmer period, or maybe just looking for any kind of shelter. The scratches are a reminder that you're not the only one trying to survive in this environment. There are foxes out there, Arctic foxes with winter coats so thick they look spherical, moving through the snow like mobile fur balls. There are wolverines, those improbable creatures that look like small bears but are actually in the weasel family, capable of taking down prey much larger than themselves. There are even wolves, the massive Siberian subspecies that can weigh 70 kilograms and travel in packs, though they generally avoid human settlements. All these animals have adaptations you lack. The Arctic fox has fur on the bottom of its paws, built-in snowshoes that also insulate against the frozen ground. Reindeer have specialized circulatory systems in their legs, with warm arterial blood flowing down alongside cold venous blood flowing up, using countercurrent heat exchange to prevent heat loss while keeping their hooves just warm enough to function. Even the ravens you've seen around the village have more adaptations than you do. They fluff their feathers to trap air, tuck one foot up into their belly feathers while standing on the other, and can reduce their metabolic rate to conserve energy. You, by contrast, are a tropical ape wearing borrowed fur and hoping your brain is clever enough to compensate for your body's inadequacy. It's a humbling thought, standing in an outhouse at minus 71 degrees Celsius, realizing that you're essentially a tourist in an environment where even the insects are more adapted than you are. The insects here have antifreeze proteins in their blood, literal biological antifreeze that prevents ice crystal formation in their cells. Some can survive being frozen solid and revive when warmed. You would just die. But you're not here to contemplate evolutionary biology. You're here because that first trip to the outhouse made you realize you forgot something crucial. You need more light to work by, and you need to check the ash container. The flashlight is good for seeing, but you need your hands free to work. The family has given you a candle lantern, an old-fashioned device with a candle inside a metal and glass housing. The metal is cold enough that you can feel it through your mittens, but the candle itself will provide light and, more importantly, a tiny bit of warmth. You set down your tools and reach for the matches in your pocket, waterproof matches in a sealed container, because ordinary matches don't work well in extreme cold. The phosphorus becomes less reactive, the wood becomes brittle, and moisture can freeze on the match head. These special matches are over-engineered Soviet-era surplus, probably manufactured in the 1970s based on the Cyrillic text on the container, but they still work perfectly. You strike a match, the sound is sharp in the enclosed space, and the flame appears impossibly bright in the darkness. Fire is your species' oldest tool for dealing with cold, the technology that allowed humans to expand out of tropical Africa into temperate and eventually Arctic regions. You're holding a miniature sun in your mittened hand, a chemical reaction producing heat and light, civilization compressed into a wooden stick. You light the candle inside the lantern and close the glass door. The flame dances and settles, and the lantern begins to glow. It's not much light, maybe equivalent to a 5-watt bulb, but it's enough. You hang the lantern on one of the antler hooks, and suddenly the interior of the outhouse is transformed. The frost patterns on the walls catch the candlelight and glow, turning the space into something almost magical, like a cave made of crystals. The warmth from the candle is negligible in the grand scheme. You're not going to heat this space with a single candle, but psychologically it helps. Humans are drawn to fire, comforted by it at a level deeper than conscious thought. That tiny flame represents safety, warmth, the ability to survive. Never mind that if you were relying on it for survival, you'd be dead in hours. Right now, it's enough. You check the ash container. It's nearly empty, as you suspected. The family goes through a lot of ash, sprinkling it into the pit after each use. The ash serves multiple purposes, as the grandmother explained. It absorbs moisture, provides a barrier layer between deposits, helps control odors during warmer weather, and eventually aids decomposition when things thaw in summer. The Saka have been using this technique for generations, long before anyone understood the chemistry of why it works. You realize you'll need to make another trip to get fresh ash? It's stored in a bucket near the house's main stove, but that can wait until you've done the primary scraping work. One crisis at a time. Right now, you need to address the frozen waste formations that have been accumulating for weeks. You position the candle lantern to give you the best light on your work area and pick up the wooden paddle. The frozen formations rise from the pit like some kind of bizarre modern art installation, brown and white layers creating striations that would be almost beautiful if you could forget what they're made of. The cold has preserved them in perfect detail. You can see individual components frozen into permanent stillness. This is the work that awaits you, the unglamorous maintenance of human dignity at the edge of habitability. No one writes songs about cleaning outhouses. No monuments commemorate this work, but civilizations are built on it nonetheless, on the thousands of small, necessary tasks that keep people alive and healthy in environments that would rather kill them. You raise the paddle, and in the candlelight, you can see your shadow cast large on the frost-covered wall. It looks like the shadow of someone about to fight a monster, which isn't entirely inaccurate. The work begins now. For real this time. The interior of the outhouse is larger than you expected once you're actually inside with the door closed and the candle lantern illuminating the space. It's maybe 1.5 meters square, cramped by normal standards, but the Saka have designed it this way deliberately. A larger space would be harder to maintain at even marginally tolerable temperatures when someone is using it. The human body radiates about 100 watts of heat at rest, like a dim light bulb, and in a small enclosed space that heat can raise the ambient temperature by a few precious degrees. In a larger space, that heat would simply dissipate uselessly. You're standing now, leaning over the twin holes in the wooden seat, shining your flashlight into the pit below while holding the candle lantern in your other hand. The depth is impressive, about 2 meters down to where you can see the bottom, though it's partially filled with the frozen accumulation. The formations rise up like stalactites in reverse, some of them reaching within 30 centimeters of the seat level. If left unchecked for another few weeks, they'd reach the seat itself, making the outhouse unusable. The formations are fascinating in a horrifying way. The cold has stratified them into visible layers, each deposit preserved as a distinct stratum, like geological time compressed into a few weeks. You can see color variations: browns, yellows, whites, even some greens that probably indicate someone ate a lot of vegetables recently. The different densities and compositions have frozen at slightly different rates, creating textures that range from smooth ice-like surfaces to rough crystalline structures. The scientific part of your brain, the part that isn't screaming about how undignified this is, recognizes that you're looking at cryogenic preservation in action. In warmer climates, waste begins decomposing immediately, bacteria breaking down organic matter within hours. Here, decomposition has essentially stopped. The bacteria that would normally do this work need liquid water to function, and at -71 degrees Celsius, there's no liquid water. The waste is frozen solid within minutes of deposition, preserved like the mammoths in the permafrost below. Researchers studying permafrost have found bacteria, viruses, and other microorganisms that have been frozen for thousands of years and can still be viable when thawed. There's actually some concern among scientists that climate change and permafrost thawing could release ancient pathogens that modern humans have no immunity to. But that's a problem for warmer times. Right now, your problem is much more immediate. You need to break apart these frozen formations and reduce the level in the pit before they become completely unmanageable. You set down the candle lantern carefully. Fire safety in a wooden structure is crucial, even when everything is frozen, and take up the wooden paddle in both hands. The paddle is about 1 meter long, made from solid hardwood, probably birch or larch, worn smooth from years of use. The business end is flat and broad, like an oar with slightly beveled edges. Someone, probably the grandfather, has carved the handle to fit comfortably in gloved hands, with grooves for fingers that work even when you're wearing thick mittens. You position yourself carefully, bracing your feet on either side of the larger hole, and take your first swing at the nearest formation. The paddle connects with a sound that echoes in the small space. A solid thunk, like hitting concrete. The formation doesn't budge. You hit it again, harder this time, and a small chip breaks off, falling into the darkness below with a faint clatter. This is going to take a while. You settle into a rhythm. Strike, pause, assess, strike again. The key is consistency rather than force. The frozen waste is incredibly hard, it has to be, given the temperature, but it's not indestructible. Each strike creates microfractures, weakens the structure slightly, and eventually larger pieces break free. It's like mining in a way, or maybe archaeology in reverse. Instead of carefully excavating layers of history, you're aggressively destroying them. After about 20 strikes, a significant chunk breaks free. Maybe 1/2 kilogram of frozen matter that tumbles into the pit with a satisfying crash. You've made your first visible progress. The formation is now about 5 centimeters shorter. Only about 25 more centimeters to go on this one, and then you can start on the others. Your arms are already starting to tire, which surprises you. You're not particularly out of shape, but swinging a paddle while wearing multiple layers of clothing, thick mittens, and standing in an awkward position is more exhausting than you anticipated. Plus, your body is burning extra energy just to maintain core temperature. Every calorie you expend on work is a calorie not available for temperature regulation. You pause to catch your breath, carefully, shallowly, through your nose, and notice that your exhalations are freezing on the inside of your face scarf even more heavily now. The physical exertion is increasing your breathing rate, which means more moisture, which means more ice. You can feel the weight of it, the scarf becoming progressively stiffer and heavier. At some point, you'll need to adjust it or risk having it freeze directly to your skin. The candle lantern flickers slightly, some tiny draft finding its way through the cracks in the walls despite the careful construction. The flame's movement causes the shadows to dance across the frost-covered walls, making the ice crystals sparkle and shift. It's almost hypnotic, and you have to force yourself to focus on the task. Getting distracted in extreme cold is dangerous. You need to maintain awareness of your body status, the time you've been out here, and the work that still needs to be done. You return to striking the formation, and pieces gradually break off. Some are small chips, others are fist-sized chunks. The larger pieces are oddly satisfying. Each one represents progress, reduces the problem by a measurable amount. You're making a difference, one frozen chunk at a time. But you're also beginning to understand why the family rotates this duty. It's not just the physical difficulty or the unpleasant nature of the work. It's the psychological weight of it, the constant awareness that you're in a hostile environment performing a task that most of modern humanity never has to think about. Every moment out here requires conscious effort. Effort to stay warm, effort to breathe properly, effort to maintain focus despite discomfort. Historians studying Arctic and subarctic cultures have noted that these societies often develop strong communal bonds and elaborate systems of mutual support, partly because individual survival in extreme conditions is so difficult. The Saka have traditional practices of sharing labor, food, and shelter that predate Soviet collectivization by centuries. When survival requires this much constant work, cooperation isn't idealistic, it's pragmatic. You think about the grandmother, now in her 70s, who did this work for decades. You think about the children in the family, who'll start doing it in their teenage years and continue for the rest of their lives unless they move to a city. This isn't a one-time adventure for them. It's Tuesday night, it's Wednesday night, it's life, repeated weekly through months of winter darkness, year after year. Another large chunk breaks free, and you're making good progress on the first formation. You estimate you've reduced it by about 15 centimeters, halfway to your goal for this one. Your arms are definitely tired now, a deep muscle fatigue that comes from repetitive motion in awkward positions. You flex your fingers inside your mittens, checking sensation. They're cold but still responsive. Good. You notice that the exertion is keeping you warmer than when you were just standing still. Your core temperature feels stable, maybe even slightly elevated. This is the paradox of work in extreme cold. It generates heat, which helps you survive, but it also makes you breathe harder and potentially sweat, which can be dangerous. Sweat in your insulating layers reduces their effectiveness, and if you stop working suddenly, that moisture can freeze against your skin. The Saka have traditional knowledge about managing this. The grandfather explained it as working warm, resting cold. When you're active, you stay just warm enough to be functional. When you rest, you cool down quickly, so rest periods need to be in warm spaces. Never stop working in the cold for extended periods, and never get so warm that you sweat heavily. It's a delicate balance, one that indigenous Arctic peoples have mastered through necessity. You take a brief pause to assess the other formations in the pit. There are 4 major ones that need attention, plus several smaller accumulations around the edges. If you maintain your current pace, you're looking at maybe another hour of work total. An hour in minus 71 degrees Celsius. Your body can handle that, probably, but it's pushing the limits. You make a mental note to take occasional brief rest periods, but not too many. The cold accumulates like debt, as you thought earlier, and the interest rate is brutal. The second formation is in an awkward position, requiring you to lean farther over the seat and strike at an angle. The first few hits bounce off ineffectively. You're not getting good power with this angle. You adjust your stance, spreading your feet wider for stability, and try again. Better. A chunk breaks free, then another. As you work, you start to notice how the cold affects everything. The wooden paddle, which seemed fine at first, is now so cold that even through your mittens you can feel it drawing heat from your hands. Wood is normally a poor conductor of heat, which is why it's used for tool handles, but at these temperatures, everything conducts heat away from your body. The difference is just a matter of degree. Wood conducts heat slowly, metal conducts it rapidly, but both are still stealing your warmth. You remember a science demonstration from school, a teacher showing how different materials conduct heat by placing metal, wood, and plastic handles in hot water and seeing which ones heat up faster. The principle is the same here, just reversed. Your hands are the hot water, the tool handles are stealing that heat, and the environment is an infinite cold sink that wants to equalize everything to minus 71 degrees Celsius. The candle in the lantern has burned down noticeably. Maybe a quarter of its length is gone, which suggests you've been at this for about 15 minutes. Time moves strangely in extreme conditions. Sometimes it feels like seconds are dragging into hours. Other times you look up and realize 20 minutes have passed without your awareness. This temporal distortion is another psychological effect of stress and extreme environments. Astronauts report similar phenomena during spacewalks. You've made good progress on the second formation when you hear a sound outside, footsteps on the squeaky snow. You freeze, listening. The steps come closer, and then there's a gentle knock on the door. A voice calls out in Russian. It's the grandfather, checking on you. "I'm okay." You call back, your voice muffled by the scarf. "Still working." There's a pause, then his voice again, probably asking if you need help. You consider this. Pride says you should finish this yourself. You started it, you should complete it. But practical wisdom suggests that two people could finish faster, and faster means less total exposure to the cold. Before you can decide, you hear his footsteps retreating. He was just checking, not offering to take over. The Sokka teach self-reliance, and part of that teaching is letting people complete tasks they've started, even when those tasks are difficult. He'll intervene if you're in actual danger, but otherwise, this is your work to finish. You return to the formations with renewed focus. The third one yields more easily. Perhaps it's newer, less densely frozen, or maybe you're getting better at finding the right angle to strike. Chunks break off in satisfying pieces, clattering into the darkness below. You're developing a technique now, learning to read the formation's weak points, to strike where the ice is most vulnerable. The fourth formation is the largest, a real monument that rises almost to seat level. This is going to require sustained effort. You position yourself for the best leverage and begin the repetitive work. Strike, break, strike, break. Your muscles protest, your breathing is labored, carefully controlled, but labored, and you're definitely getting tired. But you're also getting close to done. The first two formations are reduced to manageable stubs. The third is almost finished. This fourth one is the final boss, the last major obstacle between you and completion of this task. You strike harder, putting your remaining energy into powerful swings. Larger chunks break free, and the formation visibly shrinks. You're winning this battle through persistence and repeated force, the same way humans have won battles against hostile environments throughout history, not through elegance or sophistication, but through stubborn refusal to quit. Another massive chunk breaks free, crashes into the pit, and suddenly you can see that you've reduced the formation by more than half. You're almost there. The physical breakthrough with the fourth formation, watching that massive chunk tumble into the darkness, gives you a surge of satisfaction that's almost warm. Almost. Your arms are screaming now, the muscles in your shoulders and back protesting every swing, but you can see the end approaching. The formations that looked insurmountable 20 minutes ago are now reduced to manageable levels, none of them rising more than 15 centimeters from the pit bottom. But you're not done yet. Breaking the formations down was phase 1. Now comes phase 2. The actual cleaning, the detail work that transforms this from merely less awful to acceptably maintained. This is where the metal scraper comes into play, and where things get genuinely tricky. You set down the wooden paddle and pick up the metal scraper with caution bordering on paranoia. The family has warned you repeatedly about metal in extreme cold, and you've seen demonstrations of what happens. Metal at minus 71 degrees Celsius isn't just cold. It's aggressively, dangerously cold. Touch it with bare skin and you get instant cold burns, a phenomenon that's basically the opposite of a regular burn but causes similar tissue damage. The metal is so cold that the moisture on your skin freezes instantly, bonding your skin to the metal surface. Pull away and you leave skin behind. The scraper is a simple tool, a flat metal blade about 15 centimeters wide attached to a wooden handle. The blade is probably steel, though it could be iron. At this temperature, the distinction hardly matters. What matters is that you need to use this to scrape the walls and the seat, removing the accumulated frost and ice that's built up over the weeks, but you need to do it without letting the metal touch anything it shouldn't, including yourself. You start with the walls, working methodically from top to bottom. The scraper slides under the frost, and sheets of ice peel away with satisfying sounds. Crackling, creaking, the occasional sharp crack when a particularly thick section breaks free. The ice accumulation is thicker than you expected, in some places nearly a centimeter deep. This represents weeks of moisture from breath and body heat, freezing onto every surface, gradually building up layers. The frost patterns you found so beautiful earlier are destroyed by your scraping, which feels vaguely vandalistic, like erasing art. But beauty doesn't keep an outhouse functional. The ice buildup reduces the already small interior space and creates rough surfaces where more ice can form more easily. Regular removal is essential maintenance, part of the endless cycle of work required to maintain human systems in extreme cold. As you scrape, you notice variations in the ice. Some areas are clear and glassy, others are opaque and crystalline, and still others have a fuzzy texture like snow. These differences represent different formation conditions. Clear ice forms when moisture freezes slowly, crystalline ice forms faster, and the fuzzy stuff is probably frost that sublimated directly from vapor to solid without passing through a liquid phase. You're seeing water's phase diagram made visible, frozen moments of thermodynamic transitions. Your technique develops through practice. Short, controlled strokes work better than long, sweeping ones. The wooden handle gives you leverage, but you have to grip carefully through your mittens. Too loose and you risk dropping the tool. Too tight and you fatigue your hands faster. You find a middle ground, a grip that's firm but not exhausting, and maintain it as you work your way around the interior. The scraping generates clouds of ice crystals that catch the candlelight and float in the air like glitter, creating a strange beauty in this unlikely place. You're making it snow indoors in an outhouse at -71 degrees Celsius. The absurdity strikes you and you almost laugh, but laughing means breathing harder, which means more cold air into your lungs, so you suppress it and focus on the work. One wall done. You move to the second wall, repeating the process. The ice here is thicker, possibly because this wall faces the prevailing wind direction and gets more moisture-laden air freezing on it. You scrape more carefully, trying not to gouge the wood underneath. The walls have been treated with that oil mixture the Saka use, and you don't want to damage the protective coating. The third wall has those carved markings you noticed earlier, Cyrillic and Saka script, names and dates. You scrape around them carefully, preserving these small monuments to previous occupants. Someone named Mikhail was here in 2019. Someone else, whose name you can't decipher, marked their presence in 2003. These carvings are the outhouse's history, its guest book, and they deserve respect. The fourth wall, near the door, has the ventilation hole, the crescent moon cutout. Ice has accumulated around the edges of this opening, frost fingers growing inward like frozen ivy. You scrape these away carefully, ensuring the ventilation remains adequate. This is important for safety. The buildup of gases in an enclosed space can be dangerous, even deadly. Methane and hydrogen sulfide aren't immediately toxic at low concentrations, but they displace oxygen, and in a small enclosed space that can lead to suffocation. Historians studying pre-modern sanitation systems have documented cases where outhouse gases cause deaths, particularly in winter when people sealed structures too tightly to keep out cold. The Saka's insistence on maintaining ventilation, even at the cost of letting in cold air, represents accumulated wisdom about the balance between warmth and safety. Sometimes the traditional way isn't just quaint, it's smart engineering disguised as folk practice. With the walls complete, you turn your attention to the seat itself. This is the most important surface to clean because it's the only one humans directly contact. The wooden seat has accumulated frost around both holes, and there are some frozen drips and splatters that need to be addressed. This is the least pleasant part of the job, but also the most necessary. You scrape carefully, removing the frost and cleaning the surfaces. The wood underneath is smooth, polished by years of use and treatment. You can see the grain clearly once the ice is removed, and you notice that someone, probably the grandfather given his woodworking skills, has carved subtle drainage channels into the wood, tiny grooves that guide moisture away from where people sit. It's a detail you'd never notice unless you were cleaning it, but it represents thoughtful design. The scraping work is meditative in a way you didn't expect. The repetitive motion, the visible progress, the immediate results, there's a satisfaction to it despite the cold and discomfort. This is concrete, physical work with clear outcomes. You started with ice-covered surfaces, you're ending with clean wood. There's a directness to it that's absent from much modern work, where outcomes are abstract and progress is measured in metrics rather than visible change. But the cold is accumulating in your body despite the work. You can feel it in your toes now, they've progressed from cold to numb, which is concerning. Your fingers are okay, warmed by gripping the tools and the muscle action of your arms, but your toes are static, just standing there in your boots, gradually losing their battle with the environment. You do the stomping exercise the grandmother taught you, lifting each foot and slamming it down, using the impact to generate heat and force blood into your extremities. It helps marginally. The sensation returns slightly to your toes, they're very cold, but you can feel them again, which means they're not frostbitten yet. Yet being the operative word. The candle in the lantern has burned down to half its original length, which means you've been at this for maybe 30 minutes total. It feels simultaneously like 5 minutes and 5 hours, time dilation courtesy of extreme stress and extreme cold. You're making good progress though, the walls are clean, the seat is clean, the formations are reduced to acceptable levels. What remains is the final step. Applying fresh ash and hot salt water to clean and treat the pit itself. You pick up the bucket of salt water. It's no longer steaming, but it hasn't frozen solid yet, which means it's still above the freezing point of the salt solution. Salt water freezes at lower temperatures than pure water. That's why ocean water stays liquid at temperatures that would freeze fresh water, and why you add salt to ice when making ice cream. The salt disrupts the crystal structure that ice molecules want to form, requiring colder temperatures before solid ice can form. The bucket is heavy, probably 5 liters of water, and awkward to maneuver in the confined space. You position yourself carefully, ensuring you won't slip or spill, and begin pouring the water into the pit. The sound is startling, a hissing, crackling roar as the relatively warm water, probably around 0 degrees Celsius now, chilled from its original heat, contacts the frozen surfaces below. Steam erupts from the pit, or rather water vapor that instantly condenses into ice fog in the cold air. The outhouse fills with this fog, obscuring your vision, making the candlelight diffuse into a general glow rather than a directed beam. You pour steadily, targeting the areas where the formations were thickest, letting the salt water work its melting magic on any remaining problematic areas. The chemical warfare is working. You can hear the ice cracking and breaking as temperature differentials create stress fractures. The salt water finds its way into cracks and crevices, lowering the local freezing point and dissolving stubborn accumulations. It's not going to melt everything. The environment is simply too cold for that, but it's knocking down the worst remaining spots and creating a cleaner, more manageable surface. You use about 2/3 of the bucket, reserving the rest for a final rinse of the tools and the seat surface. The ice fog gradually clears as the moisture freezes out of the air and settles on surfaces as new frost. You'll need to scrape these surfaces again next week, starting the cycle over, but that's future you's problem. Present you has done the heavy lifting. The final step is the ash. You reach for the container, which you retrieved on your second trip to the outhouse, and open it carefully. Wood ash, fine and gray, the cremated remains of the birch and larch that heated the family's house. The Saka waste nothing. The trees that kept them warm in life continue to serve them in death, their ash becoming part of the sanitation system. You sprinkle the ash liberally into the pit, creating a gray layer over the remaining frozen surfaces. The ash will absorb moisture, provide insulation, help control any odors when warmer weather arrives, and eventually contribute to decomposition when summer comes and bacteria become active again. It's elegant in its simplicity, a closed-loop system that turns one household waste product into a management tool for another. Some cultures, you recall, considered human waste dangerous or impure, creating elaborate taboos around it. Others, including many indigenous Arctic peoples, took a more pragmatic view. It's part of life, it needs to be managed, so develop systems to manage it efficiently. The Saka approach falls firmly in the pragmatic camp. The outhouse isn't hidden away in shame. It's a normal part of the household infrastructure, maintained regularly and discussed openly. You finish sprinkling the ash and close the container. Your work is essentially complete. The formations are broken down, the surfaces are scraped clean, salt water and ash have been applied, and the pit is in good condition for another week of use. You've accomplished the task, maintained the household system, and fulfilled your responsibility to the family hosting you. But you've also paid a price. Your body is thoroughly cold now, not hypothermic, you're monitoring yourself carefully and you're not seeing the warning signs, but definitely cold in a way that goes beyond surface discomfort. You can feel it deep in your core, a chill that's settled into your bones despite your layers and your work-generated heat. Your toes are numb again despite the stomping. Your fingers are starting to lose sensitivity. Your face feels frozen, the scarf rigid with ice from your breath. It's time to go inside. Past time, actually. You've been out here for maybe 40 minutes total, counting the multiple trips, and that's about the limit for this temperature even with good preparation and proper clothing. You need to get back to warmth before the cold transitions from uncomfortable to dangerous. You gather your tools, wooden paddle, metal scraper, mostly empty salt water bucket, ash container. Everything gets carefully arranged so you can carry it all in one trip. No way are you making another journey out here tonight. The candle lantern goes in one hand, the tools bundled in the other arm. You take one last look around the interior, checking your work. The walls are clean, scraped down to treated wood. The seat is frost-free and ready for use. The pit is properly treated with ash and cleared of dangerous formations. You've done well. The grandmother will inspect it tomorrow. She inspects everything you've learned, but you're confident it will pass her standards. You blow out the candle, plunging the space into darkness broken only by the moonlight filtering through the crescent moon cutout. The smoke from the extinguished candle smells of paraffin and burned wick, familiar and oddly comforting. You tuck the lantern under your arm with the other tools and reach for the door handle. The leather hinges creak again as you pull the door open, and the full force of the outside cold hits you like a physical blow. The outhouse interior, warmed infinitesimally by your body heat and the candle's flame, felt tolerable. The outside air at -71 degrees Celsius feels like a betrayal, the environment reminding you exactly how hostile it is. The house beckons, that single lit window promising warmth and safety. 50 meters away. Less than a minute of walking under normal circumstances. An eternity when your body is already cold and every step takes you deeper into heat deficit. You step out of the outhouse and begin your final journey of the night, back toward civilization and warmth. The door of the outhouse swings shut behind you with a finality that feels almost ominous. The leather hinges creaking one last time as if saying goodbye. Or maybe warning you. The cold outside the outhouse is somehow worse than you remember from just 40 minutes ago. Your body has been working, generating heat, staying marginally warm, and now the contrast between your internal state and the external environment feels starker, more aggressive. The -71 degrees Celsius air doesn't gradually chill you. It attacks, searching for any gap in your defenses, any exposed millimeter of skin, any weakness in your layered armor. You take your first step toward the house, and your left boot breaks through a crust of snow with a crack that sounds like breaking glass. The sound echoes across the silent village, impossibly loud in the still night air. You freeze, not metaphorically, though that's happening too, listening for any response. Nothing. The village sleeps. Even the dogs are quiet now, conserved in their insulated fur balls, waiting for dawn. The moon has climbed higher, changing the shadows again. The stilted houses cast different patterns now, and the aurora has intensified. Ribbons of green and occasional purple dancing across the northern sky with more vigor than before. Scientists understand the mechanism. Solar wind particles channeled by Earth's magnetic field, colliding with atmospheric gases. But understanding doesn't diminish the otherworldly beauty of it. The lights pulse and shimmer like something alive, like the sky itself is breathing. Traditional Saka stories say the aurora are the spirits of ancestors playing ball with a walrus skull, which is a beautifully specific image. Other Arctic peoples have different interpretations. Some see it as spirits of the dead dancing, others as omens of coming war or change. The scientific explanation and the spiritual explanations can coexist, you think. Maybe they're describing the same phenomenon from different perspectives, like the parable of blind men describing an elephant. Your tools are heavy in your arms. The wooden paddle, the metal scraper, the bucket, the ash container, the candle lantern. Collectively, they probably weigh 5 or 6 kilograms, which isn't much under normal circumstances but becomes significant when you're walking through snow in extreme cold while wearing multiple layers that restrict movement. Each step requires deliberate effort, lifting your feet high enough to clear the snow, placing them carefully to avoid breaking through into deeper drifts. 10 meters from the outhouse, you make the mistake of trying to adjust your grip on the tools, and the metal scraper slips. Your instinct is to catch it, and you do with your mittened hand, fortunately, but the sudden movement makes you breathe sharply through your mouth. The cold air hits your throat like inhaling broken glass. and you cough reflexively, which makes you breathe harder, which makes it worse. You force yourself to stop, to slow down, to return to shallow nasal breathing despite your body's panic response demanding more oxygen. This is what the grandfather warned you about, the cascade effect where one mistake leads to another, and suddenly you're breathing too hard, working too hard, exposing yourself to more cold than your system can handle. People die this way, not from single catastrophic failures, but from chains of small errors that accumulate into fatal exposure. You steady yourself, consciously relaxing your breathing, and continue forward at a more controlled pace. 20 meters from the outhouse, 30 meters from the house. You're in the no man's land between shelters, equidistant from both, and the psychological weight of it presses down. This is where that researcher died in the 1960s, you remember, not here specifically, but in this kind of space, caught between 2 points of safety, unable to reach either. Your rational mind knows you're fine, you're dressed properly, you're not in immediate danger, but your lizard brain is screaming at you about predators and exposure and being caught in the open. The tools in your arms are getting colder, drawing heat from your body through your layers. Even wood, poor conductor that it is, eventually equilibrates to ambient temperature, and ambient temperature right now is cold enough to freeze carbon dioxide. The metal scraper is worse, you can feel it through your mitten, a cold spot against your forearm where it's pressed against your body. You shift it away, trying to minimize contact, but there's only so much you can do while carrying everything. Your toes have progressed beyond numb into a state you don't have words for. They're there, you know they're there because you can see your boots moving, but you can't feel them anymore. No pain, no sensation at all, just absence. This is concerning. This is potentially the beginning of frostbite, though it might also just be extreme cold without tissue damage. You won't know until you get inside and warm them carefully. The grandmother has told you horror stories about people who warmed frozen extremities too quickly. The tissue damage from rapid warming can be worse than the freezing itself. 25 meters from the house now. The lit window is getting closer, that yellow glow promising warmth and safety. You can almost feel the heat of the stove. Imagine the sensation of thawing, of blood returning to your extremities with that painful prickling sensation that somehow feels wonderful because it means you're alive and recovering. But you're not there yet. Still 5 meters to go, and every meter counts. The snow here is deeper. You're in a slight depression where snow has accumulated, and your boots sink to mid-calf with each step. The extra effort required makes you breathe harder again, and you have to consciously moderate your breathing, fighting your body's demand for more oxygen. The air is so cold that deep breathing feels like drowning in reverse. Instead of liquid in your lungs, you're inhaling something so cold it's almost solid. A sound to your left makes you turn your head. Just a slight movement, but enough to expose a small gap between your scarf and your hood. Cold air rushes in, finding that vulnerability, and you feel it on your neck like a knife. You quickly adjust your clothing, closing the gap, but the damage is done. That brief exposure has chilled the skin there, and now that spot radiates cold, a point source of discomfort adding to your overall thermal debt. The house is close now, maybe 3 meters. You can see details, the snow accumulation on the porch, icicles hanging from the eaves like frozen stalactites, the frost patterns on the windows surrounding that one lit pane. The door looks impossibly welcoming, more beautiful than any door has ever looked, because it represents the boundary between hostile environment and human warmth. 2 meters, 1 meter. You reach the porch steps, 3 wooden stairs leading up to the elevated platform where the door sits. The stairs are treacherous with ice, and you take them carefully, using your hip to help support the tools while you grip the railing with one hand. The railing is wrapped in cloth, a smart modification that prevents frozen skin adhering to frozen wood. You reach the porch and the door is right there, but you face a new problem. You need to open it and your hands are full of tools. You set everything down carefully on the porch, which is sheltered enough that it's only about minus 65 degrees Celsius here, practically balmy by comparison. Your fingers are stiff inside your mittens, and removing them to grip the door handle is going to be painful. You strip off one outer mitten, keeping the thin liner glove on, and reach for the door handle. It's wood, of course it's wood. Metal door handles in this climate would be weapons, but even wood this cold burns. You grip it anyway and turn, and the door opens inward, releasing a wave of warmth that hits you like a wall. The temperature gradient is extreme. You're stepping from minus 71 degrees Celsius outside to maybe 20 degrees Celsius inside. A change of 91 degrees Celsius in the space of a doorway. Your body doesn't know how to process this. The warm air on your face feels painfully hot, even though objectively it's just room temperature. Your glasses, you put them on earlier to see better while working, instantly fog over completely, rendering you blind. Water vapor from the warm interior air condenses on the frozen lenses, creating an opaque white layer. You step inside quickly, pulling the tools in with you, and shut the door behind you. The warmth is overwhelming, almost dizzying after the extended cold exposure. You stand in the small entryway, the traditional Arctic entrance design with a small room between the outer door and the inner door, providing an airlock that prevents heat loss from the main living space, and begin the process of transitioning back to human habitability. First, the scarf. You unwrap it carefully from your face, and it resists. The ice from your breath has frozen it stiff, and parts of it have adhered to your skin where moisture condensed and froze. You work it loose gently, not pulling hard, because you remember the warning about ripping skin. The scarf comes free finally, and you can see the ice on it. A thick crust of white crystals coating the fabric where your mouth and nose were, the frozen record of 40 minutes of breathing. Your face is exposed now, and the warm air stings. Your cheeks, nose, and forehead are painfully cold, and warming them feels like pins and needles multiplied by 1,000. This is the dreaded hot aches phenomenon. As blood returns to cold tissue, the nerve endings wake up and scream at you. It's excruciating in a way that's hard to describe, a burning, stabbing, throbbing pain that makes you want to cry. But it's also good news. Pain means the tissue is alive and recovering. Frostbitten tissue doesn't hurt when it warms. It stays numb because the nerves are dead. Your face hurts like hell, which means your face is fine. You'll recover completely. Your hands come next. You strip off the remaining outer mitten and both liner gloves, and your fingers are white and stiff. You flex them experimentally, and they move but sluggishly like mechanical digits rather than living flesh. You hold them up in the warm air, not near any direct heat source. Remember, gradual warming is crucial, and wait for circulation to return. The pain starts within seconds. It's extraordinary pain, deep and burning and completely absorbing. Your fingers feel like they're being stabbed with hot needles, like they're simultaneously burning and freezing. You clench your teeth and ride it out, knowing from the grandmother's instruction that this is normal, this is good. This means you're recovering without permanent damage. The grandfather appears in the doorway to the main room, wrapped in a heavy robe, looking concerned but not alarmed. He says something in Russian, probably asking if you're okay. You nod, not trusting your voice yet, and gesture at your hands. He nods back, understanding. He's seen this thousands of times. He disappears and returns a moment later with a basin of lukewarm water. Not hot, lukewarm, and gestures for you to place your hands in it. You do, and the sensation is bizarre. The water feels hot even though it's probably only about 25 degrees Celsius, and the transition from air to water warming intensifies the pins and needles sensation temporarily before starting to ease it. Your fingers slowly pink up, color returning as blood flow increases. You watch the transformation, fascinated despite the pain. Dead white to living pink, happening in real time, your body's heat regulation system fighting to restore homeostasis. Your feet are next. You sit on the bench in the entryway and work off your boots. The Valenki come off reluctantly, stiff with cold and ice accumulation. Your socks are damp with sweat and condensation, which is concerning but not catastrophic since you're warming now. You peel the socks off, and your toes are white and numb, completely without sensation. The grandfather brings a second basin of lukewarm water, and you immerse your feet. The warming pain is worse here, maybe because your feet were colder or maybe because feet just hurt more. The pain is so intense it's nauseating, and you have to focus on breathing slowly to avoid getting sick. But gradually, over minutes that feel like hours, the color returns, sensation returns, and the pain transitions from acute stabbing to dull aching. You're going to be fine. No permanent damage. All digits accounted for and recovering. You've successfully completed your mission. Outhouse cleaned, body intact, character presumably built. The grandmother appears now, wrapped in her own robe, and inspects you with the practiced eye of someone who's treated cold injuries countless times. She looks at your hands, your feet, your face, and nods approval. You did well. You managed the exposure properly, didn't panic, returned before causing serious damage. She says something in Russian, and the grandfather translates into his limited English. She says you are not stupid city person. You are learning. Coming from her, this is apparently high praise. Tools still need to be dealt with. The grandfather helps you bring them fully inside, hanging the paddle and scraper in the entryway where they'll gradually warm without thermal shock that could crack the wood or metal. The bucket gets emptied. The ash container returned to its place near the stove. Everything is put away properly because in survival cultures, equipment maintenance isn't optional. It's the difference between having tools that work next time and having broken tools when you need them. The grandmother brings you hot tea, real tea, black and strong, with sugar and possibly some kind of herbal addition you don't recognize. You cup the warm mug in your still recovering hands, feeling the heat transfer through the ceramic, and take small sips. The warmth spreading through your core from the inside feels different from the external warming. Deeper, more fundamental, reaching parts of you that the air couldn't touch. You're sitting now in the main room, near the stove but not too near, warming gradually and safely. The family has returned to bed. It's late, nearly 1 a.m., and they've indulged your cold weather adventure enough. But they've left the tea and made sure you're set up for safe recovery before retiring. The stove radiates steady heat, the kind that only wood can provide, a deep warmth that permeates the space. Your body is systematically recovering. Blood flow to extremities is restored. Core temperature is stabilizing. The pain has mostly subsided, replaced by a deep, bone-level weariness. You've expended enormous energy maintaining body temperature, performing physical labor, and managing stress. Your body's energy reserves are depleted, and now that you're safe, the adrenaline is wearing off, leaving you exhausted. But you did it. You cleaned the outhouse at minus 71 degrees Celsius, maintained a critical piece of household infrastructure, and survived an extended exposure to one of the harshest environments on Earth. The task that seemed impossible when the grandmother first explained it is now completed. Just another Tuesday night in Yakutia, just another necessary chore in the endless work of maintaining human life at the edge of habitability. You look down at your hands, now pink and functional, and flex your fingers. They work. Everything works. You're intact, warmed, recovering. Tomorrow there will be other work, other challenges, but tonight you've earned your rest. You finish your tea, set the cup down, and let the warmth of the house embrace you fully. Character built, lesson learned, respect for the cold permanently installed in your psyche. The next morning arrives with the subtlety of a glacier, slow, inevitable, and cold. You wake in the small side room the family has given you, wrapped in so many blankets and furs that you can barely move, and for a moment you're disoriented. The events of last night feel dreamlike, impossible. Did you really spend 40 minutes at minus 71 degrees Celsius cleaning frozen human waste? Surely that was some kind of fever dream brought on by too much horse meat stew and cultural adjustment stress. But then you try to move, and your body provides immediate evidence that yes, it absolutely happened. Your shoulders ache from swinging the paddle. Your back protests from bending over in awkward positions. Your hands and feet throb with a dull soreness that's the aftermath of the hot aches from last night. Even your face feels tender, the skin slightly tight, as if you got a mild sunburn except it was a cold burn, the UV radiation replaced by extreme temperature. Light filters weakly through the small window. It's maybe 10 a.m., judging by the angle, and the sun is attempting its brief daily appearance. Winter sunlight in Yakutia is a pale, anemic thing, casting long shadows even at what passes for midday. The sun barely clears the horizon before starting its descent again, a celestial body that seems to have lost confidence in its own purpose here. You extract yourself from the blanket cocoon slowly, taking inventory. 10 fingers, present and functional. 10 toes, also accounted for, though they're the last to warm up and still feel slightly tender. Face, attached and operational. You survived. Moreover, you survived without frostbite, without hypothermia, without any of the cold injuries that could have resulted from mistakes or misfortune. The room is cold despite being indoors, maybe 12 degrees Celsius, which is actually quite comfortable by Yakutian winter standards. The family maintains the main room near the stove at about 20 degrees Celsius, but other rooms are allowed to be cooler to conserve fuel. Wood and coal don't grow on trees. Well, wood does technically, but you know what we mean. Fuel is precious, collected during the summer months and rationed carefully through the long winter. Heating an entire house to modern Western standards would require more fuel than a typical family can gather and store. You dress in your indoor clothes, still multiple layers, but lighter than the survival gear from last night, and emerge into the main living area. The grandmother is already up, probably has been for hours, maintaining the stove and preparing food. She glances at you, nods approval at your appearance, alive, ambulatory, not showing signs of cold injury, and says something in Saka. You don't understand the words, but the tone is clear. Good morning, you survived. Now it's time to be useful. The grandfather is sitting near the stove, working on something with his hands. It looks like he's repairing a leather harness, stitching it with thread made from sinew. He looks up, grins, and says in his broken English, "You sleep like dead person. Very tired from toilet work." Yes, there's no mockery in his voice, just amusement and maybe a hint of respect. You passed a test last night, proved you could handle an essential task in extreme conditions. Breakfast is already laid out: bread, butter, some kind of preserved fish, tea. You eat gratefully, realizing you're ravenously hungry. Your body burned through enormous energy reserves last night, and it's demanding replenishment. The fish is strong-flavored, oily, probably caught in one of the rivers during summer and preserved through smoking or salting. It's not what you'd typically eat for breakfast, but after last night, everything tastes good. As you eat, you find yourself thinking about the psychology of what you experienced. The outhouse maintenance wasn't just a physical challenge, it was mental and emotional too. There's something profound about engaging with such a basic, unglamorous necessity in such extreme conditions. In your normal life, wherever that is, waste disposal is invisible. You flush and forget. The entire complex infrastructure of sewers, treatment plants, and water recycling happens out of sight, maintained by people you never meet. Here, in this village, in this climate, nothing can be invisible. The outhouse is 50 meters from the house, far enough for psychological distance, close enough to reach in extreme cold. Everyone in the household takes turns maintaining it. Everyone understands the work involved, the discomfort, the necessity. There's a democracy to it, a shared understanding that survival requires unglamorous labor and everyone must contribute. The grandmother brings you more tea and sits down across from you. She says something long and complex in Saka, and the grandfather translates in pieces. She says the outhouse is good. You did well. The formations were broken properly, the walls were scraped clean, the ash was applied correctly. Next time will be easier because you understand now. Next time. The phrase hangs in the air. You'll be here for another 2 months as part of the cultural exchange program. There will be several more next times. The thought is daunting but also strangely reassuring. Last night felt impossible until you did it, and then it became possible, difficult but achievable. The next time will be less terrifying because you'll know what to expect, know what your body can handle, know the techniques that work. Historians studying how humans adapt to extreme environments have identified this psychological progression. The first exposure is overwhelming, threatening, potentially traumatic. But if the person survives without serious injury, subsequent exposures become manageable. The unknown becomes known. The terrifying becomes merely difficult. This is how humans have colonized every climate zone on Earth, from tropical rainforests to Arctic tundra. Not through genetic adaptation, which takes thousands of generations, but through cultural adaptation and psychological habituation. The Saka have been doing this for centuries. Every child born here goes through a similar process. The first time they venture into serious cold is frightening, but they learn, they adapt, they incorporate the knowledge into their understanding of the world. By adulthood, tasks like outhouse maintenance in extreme cold are just part of life. No more remarkable than you might consider taking out the trash or mowing a lawn. After breakfast, the grandfather invites you to see something. He bundles up, even stepping outside briefly requires proper clothing, and you follow suit, layering carefully. The two of you step out onto the porch, and the cold hits you again, though today it's only minus 65 degrees Celsius. Positively tropical compared to last night. The difference between minus 71 degrees Celsius and minus 65 degrees Celsius is enormous in terms of survivability. Those 6 degrees represent significantly reduced cold stress on the human body. The grandfather leads you around the house, pointing out various features you might have missed in the darkness and stress of last night. The house's stilts, for example, they're not just randomly placed. They're positioned to account for the permafrost's slight seasonal movement. Even though permafrost is permanent by definition, the top meter or two, the active layer, does thaw slightly in summer and refreezes in winter, causing the ground to shift. The stilts are engineered to accommodate this movement without allowing the house to tilt or sink. He shows you the water system. In winter, there is no running water. Can't be, pipes would freeze instantly. Instead, they collect ice and snow, melt it indoors near the stove, and use it for cooking, drinking, and minimal washing. He shows you the summer water barrel, now empty and frozen solid, which collects rainwater when the weather permits. Water, that substance you probably take for granted in your normal life, requires constant work here. Every drop must be collected, melted, conserved. The woodpile is impressive, stacked logs reaching higher than your head, representing months of summer work. Trees must be cut, transported, split, and stacked during the brief warm months when such work is possible. Running out of wood in winter is a death sentence, so families overstock, cutting more than they think they'll need as insurance against unexpectedly long or cold winters. The grandfather takes you to look at the outhouse from the outside in daylight. In the morning light, it looks less ominous than it did last night. Just a small wooden structure, weathered but solid, with smoke residue around the ventilation hole and frost patterns decorating the walls. He opens the door and peers inside, nodding approval at your work. Through him, the grandmother has apparently passed judgment. Acceptable quality, proper technique, you may continue living. He explains through gestures and limited English that the family has maintained this outhouse for 23 years. Before that, they had a different one in a different location. Outhouses have finite lifespans, and when one pit fills completely or the structure deteriorates beyond repair, you build a new one in a new location. The old pit is left to decompose over years, eventually becoming indistinguishable from the surrounding soil, though what soil means in a permafrost environment is complicated. Some of the older pit locations, he tells you, are marked with stones or posts. Not for any spiritual reason, just practical knowledge. You don't want to dig a new well or cellar into an old outhouse pit. The village has an informal map of where old waste sites are, knowledge passed down through generations, ensuring that human waste stays properly separated from water sources and living spaces. It's a sobering reminder that people have been living here, in this impossible cold, managing these same necessities, for hundreds of years. The specific outhouse you cleaned last night is young by Saka standards. 23 years is nothing. But the practice, the accumulated wisdom of how to maintain sanitation systems in extreme cold, goes back centuries. Your one night of discomfort connects you to a long chain of people who faced the same challenges and developed solutions that work. Back inside, warming by the stove, you ask the grandfather about winter in general. How do people cope with months of this cold, the darkness, the isolation? He thinks for a moment, then replies, "We don't cope. Coping means suffering, enduring. We live. This is life. You cope with unusual things, hard things. But if something happens every year, it's not unusual. It's just life." The distinction is important. From an outsider perspective, Yakutian winter seems like a disaster to be endured, an ordeal to survive. But for people who've known nothing else, it's simply the yearly rhythm. Summer is short, winter is long, and you adjust your expectations and activities accordingly. In summer, you work frantically, building, gathering, hunting, fishing, preserving food, collecting fuel. In winter, you slow down, maintain equipment, tell stories, do indoor crafts, venture out only when necessary. The grandmother adds something, and the grandfather translates. She says people from outside always ask, "How do you survive?" But never ask, "How do you live?" Surviving is minimum. Living is different. We have children, we laugh, we make art, we sing. We live, not just survive. It's a rebuke, gently delivered but pointed. The assumption that life in extreme cold is merely subsistence-level survival, that people here are engaged in constant desperate struggle, is condescending. The Saka have music, literature, visual arts, complex social structures, philosophical traditions. They have full, rich lives that happen to take place in a climate that would kill unprepared outsiders quickly. You think about last night's outhouse maintenance from this perspective. Yes, it was physically challenging and uncomfortable, but it was also just one task among many, not the defining experience of Yakutian life. The family also cooks, repairs equipment, carves wood, sews clothing, maintains social relationships with neighbors, celebrates holidays, argues about politics, worries about their children's education. All the normal human activities that happen regardless of climate. The cold is a factor, certainly. It shapes how and when activities occur, but it doesn't prevent living, only modifies it. And the people here don't see themselves as heroic survivors of extreme conditions. They see themselves as normal people living normal lives in the place they call home. The fact that their home would kill most of humanity within hours is, from their perspective, rather beside the point. Later that day, you witness something that crystallizes this understanding. The family's teenage son returns from school. Yes, school continues even in winter, even at these temperatures. Classes are only canceled if it drops below -52 degrees Celsius for elementary students or -56 degrees Celsius for older students. Today, at -65 degrees Celsius, is cold but not cold enough to cancel. He's walked approximately 2 kilometers to school and back, properly dressed, and seems entirely unfazed. He drops his backpack, heads to the stove to warm up, and starts complaining to his mother. Not about the cold, but about homework. Mathematics, specifically. Too much homework, the teacher is unreasonable, the problems are too difficult. It's the universal teenager complaint, and it's oddly comforting. Here, in one of the coldest inhabited places on Earth, teenagers still hate homework. Some things transcend climate. The outhouse maintenance you struggled through last night, the achievement you felt in completing it, is for this family just Tuesday. Or Wednesday. Or whenever the rotation dictates it's someone's turn. The teenage son will do it next week, probably while listening to music on his phone. Yes, smartphones work here. They just need to be kept warm in inside pockets. The grandmother did it for decades without complaint. The grandfather still does it in his 70s, though less frequently now that younger family members are available. Your contribution was meaningful, you fulfilled your household responsibility, maintained necessary infrastructure, proved you could handle Yakutian realities. But it was also utterly ordinary, one iteration of a task performed weekly by millions of people across Siberia's cold regions. A small piece of the vast puzzle of how humans live in extreme environments. As afternoon fades, which happens early, the sun having already begun its retreat toward the horizon despite the clock only reading 2 p.m., you find yourself oddly grateful for the experience. Not in a masochistic way, not, I'm glad I suffered, but grateful for the perspective, for understanding viscerally rather than intellectually what life here entails. You've gained respect for the unglamorous work of maintaining human systems in hostile environments. You've learned that dignity doesn't come from avoiding difficulty but from engaging with it competently. And you've discovered that the human capacity to adapt, to normalize, to find meaning and joy even in harsh circumstances, is more profound than you previously understood. The outhouse is clean, the household functions, life continues, and somehow, impossibly, that's enough. The weeks following that first outhouse cleaning settle into a rhythm that you wouldn't have believed possible when you first arrived. Your turn in the rotation comes around again, and again, and again, and each time it gets marginally easier. Not easy, never easy, but the terror of the unknown is replaced by the discomfort of the known, which is psychologically a completely different experience. You know now what your body can handle, what the work entails, how long it takes. The cold is still cold, the task is still unpleasant, but you've developed a relationship with both that's based on familiarity rather than fear. By your 4th time cleaning the outhouse, you've developed your own small efficiencies. You've learned that starting with the largest formation and working down to smaller ones gives you psychological momentum, The visible progress early in the task keeps you motivated through the tedious detail work later. You've discovered that humming while you work, softly, through your nose, just enough to create a vibration, helps you maintain steady breathing and prevents the shallow panic breathing that wastes energy and increases cold exposure. You've also learned to read the cold itself, to distinguish between different qualities of extreme temperature. Minus 71 degrees Celsius with no wind and clear skies feels different from minus 68 degrees Celsius with slight breeze and ice fog. The number is only part of the story. Humidity, wind, atmospheric pressure, even the phase of the moon affecting how light or dark the work environment is. All these factors influence the experience of cold and the strategies required to manage it safely. The grandmother has started trusting you with other cold weather tasks, which you interpret as approval. You help collect ice for melting, a process that involves identifying clean snow away from the outhouse and other contamination sources, cutting blocks with a saw, and transporting them inside. You assist with checking the woodpile, rotating stock so the driest wood is used first. You learn to identify the signs of equipment stress: leather that's becoming too brittle, metal that's developing cold-induced cracks, wood that's splitting from temperature cycling. One evening, about 6 weeks into your stay, the grandfather invites you to join him for what he calls cold training. This turns out to be a traditional soccer practice, deliberate exposure to extreme cold in controlled circumstances, building physiological and psychological resilience. You walk together about 1 kilometer from the village, properly dressed but without the heavy outer layers, and simply stand in the minus 69 degrees Celsius air for measured periods, monitoring your body's responses, learning to distinguish between dangerous cold signals and merely uncomfortable ones. The cold talks. He explains in his improving English, your Russian has also improved, so communication is getting easier. But you must know its language. This, he pinches his earlobe. This feeling is just cold, not dangerous. But this, he touches his nose. This feeling, white skin. No pain. This is frostbite starting. Different languages. This practical education that can't be learned from books. The difference between cold discomfort and cold injury has subtle signals, and experienced Arctic dwellers can read those signals accurately because their lives depend on it. He teaches you to monitor your extremities systematically, to recognize when you're approaching dangerous thresholds, to understand that pain is usually good. It means tissue is alive and protesting, while numbness without pain is the warning sign that demands immediate action. During these training sessions, he also shares stories. Not the dramatic adventure tales you might expect, but mundane histories that reveal the reality of Arctic life. He tells you about his grandfather, your host's great-grandfather, who lived through the 1930s collectivization period when Stalin's government tried to force nomadic Saka into permanent settlements. Many starved because their traditional food sources, reindeer herds they followed seasonally, were disrupted by Soviet agricultural policies that made no sense in Arctic conditions. They sent Russian agricultural experts, he says, laughing bitterly. From Moscow, these men, they tell us to plant wheat. Wheat, here. He gestures at the frozen landscape. The ground is frozen to maybe 1 meter down, and they say plant wheat. We tell them we have reindeer, we have fish, we have traditional foods that work here. They say, no, you must be modern Soviet citizens, grow crops like civilized people. So we try, because refusing means prison or worse. Of course, nothing grows. Then they blame us for being lazy, for sabotaging agriculture. Many people died. The historical record confirms this. Soviet agricultural policies caused widespread famine across the USSR in the 1930s, but the impact on Arctic indigenous peoples was particularly severe because their traditional subsistence strategies were more specifically adapted to local conditions. Replacing reindeer herding with wheat farming in Yakutia was like trying to grow coconuts in Greenland. Not just difficult, but fundamentally absurd. Yet the Soviet government persisted, and people died, and survivors learned to navigate between official requirements and practical realities. But we survived, the grandfather continues. We learned to appear Soviet on outside, attend the meetings, say the correct words, display the red flags, while keeping old knowledge alive in private. The women especially, your grandmother's grandmother, she kept all the traditional knowledge. The survival skills, the food preservation, the cold weather techniques. She taught them quietly, in homes, while the men were busy with Soviet performances. This hidden history fascinates you, the idea that traditional knowledge survived totalitarian attempts to erase it by going underground, maintained primarily by women whose work was dismissed as merely domestic and therefore beneath official notice. The outhouse maintenance you've been learning, the ice collection, the food preservation, the clothing construction, all of these skills that seem mundane actually represent resistance, cultural persistence, the refusal to let extreme cold and political oppression completely erase a way of life. Historians still argue whether this kind of cultural persistence should be celebrated as resistance or mourned as oppression that forced people to live double lives, saying one thing publicly while believing another privately. The Saka people themselves seem to have mixed feelings: pride in survival, anger at what was lost, pragmatic acceptance of political realities. The grandfather expresses all these emotions in his stories, sometimes within the same sentence. The cold training sessions become regular events, and you notice genuine changes in your tolerance. Temperatures that felt lethal during your first week now feel merely unpleasant. Your body has adapted somewhat, you've put on weight, the Saka diet's heavy fat and protein content building insulation and fuel reserves. Your circulation has improved, your extremities staying warmer longer. But more significantly, your psychology has adapted. The cold is no longer an existential threat, but a manageable environmental factor, dangerous if disrespected but navigable with proper knowledge and preparation. You've also developed relationships with other village residents. The family has introduced you to neighbors, and despite language barriers, you've found ways to communicate. There's a woman 2 houses down who's teaching you Saka phrases. Practical ones like, "The outhouse door is frozen," and "I need more tea." There's an elderly man who carves intricate miniature reindeer from birchwood and has given you several as gifts, refusing any payment. There's a child, maybe 8 years old, who finds your foreignness hilarious and follows you around sometimes, imitating your accent and asking incomprehensible questions. These connections make the village feel less like a place you're visiting and more like a community you're part of, however temporarily. You're not just observing Yakutian life from the outside, you're participating, contributing, making mistakes and learning from them. The outhouse maintenance is part of this integration. When you clean it competently, you're not just completing a chore, you're fulfilling a social obligation, maintaining infrastructure that the whole household depends on, proving that you're a functional member of the community rather than a tourist burden. One night, about 2 months into your stay, there's a village gathering. These happen occasionally during winter, celebrations, social events that break up the dark monotony and reinforce community bonds. This particular gathering is someone's birthday, and the celebration takes place in the largest house, where maybe 30 people crowd into the main room, generating enough collective body heat that the temperature rises to almost uncomfortable levels. There's food, preserved fish, frozen venison that's shaved into thin slices and eaten raw, bread, butter, preserves made from summer berries. There's also vodka, consumed in moderation despite stereotypes about Russian drinking. The Saka relationship with alcohol is complicated. It's used ceremonially and socially but carefully, because everyone understands that alcohol and extreme cold make a lethal combination. There's music. Someone has a komus, a traditional Saka jaw harp that produces strange, resonant tones. Someone else sings, a deep throat singing style that sounds alien and ancient and powerful. People dance, though dancing in this context means subtle movements in place, swaying and stepping in patterns you don't understand but find mesmerizing. And there's conversation, stories being exchanged in Saka and Russian. Some stories are personal, someone's child's achievement, a successful hunt, a piece of equipment cleverly repaired. Others are traditional tales, ancient stories about animals and spirits and heroes who survived impossible odds. You don't understand all the words, but you understand the function. These stories encode knowledge, reinforce values, maintain cultural continuity across generations. At some point in the evening, the conversation turns to your outhouse maintenance. This shouldn't be entertaining, but somehow it is. The family describes your first attempt, your terror, your careful preparation, and everyone laughs. Not cruelly, but with recognition. Everyone in this room has faced similar challenges during their own integration into Arctic life, whether they were born here and faced it as children or came from elsewhere and faced it as adults like you. Someone asks through translation how your home compares to here. You try to explain indoor plumbing, the concept that waste simply disappears when you flush, that you never have to think about where it goes or how it's processed. This is genuinely difficult for some of the older people to comprehend, not because they're unsophisticated, but because it seems magical, impossible. Where does it go? How do the pipes not freeze? What happens when the system breaks? Your explanations sound increasingly absurd as you try to describe sewage treatment plants and municipal water systems to people who've managed their own water and waste directly their entire lives. The grandmother says something that makes everyone laugh, and the grandfather translates. She says your way sounds complicated. Here, you know where everything is, you control it yourself. When the outhouse fills, you dig a new one. Simple. Your way, when pipes break, who fixes them? You must wait for expert? Call government? Very complicated. She's not wrong. The convenience of modern sanitation comes with hidden complexity and dependency on systems you don't understand and can't maintain yourself. The Saka system is labor-intensive but transparent and self-sufficient. Historians studying technology and society have long noted this trade-off: convenience versus autonomy, comfort versus self-reliance. Neither system is objectively superior. They're optimized for different priorities and circumstances. As the evening progresses and the vodka circulates, you partake minimally, remembering the warnings. The conversation becomes more philosophical. Someone asks what you've learned from your time here, what you'll take back to your normal life. You think about this carefully, because the question deserves a genuine answer. I've learned, you say slowly, working through the translation with the grandfather's help, that dignity is work. That comfort makes you weak if you're not careful. That humans can adapt to almost anything if they must. And that waste doesn't disappear. It just goes somewhere else and someone has to deal with it whether you see them or not. The room goes quiet, people considering this. Then the grandmother says something else, longer this time, and the grandfather translates. She says yes, this is true. But she also says you've learned something else, maybe without knowing. You've learned that cold is honest. It doesn't lie, doesn't pretend, doesn't care about your feelings. In the cold, you can't fake competence. You either know what you're doing or you die. This makes people here very honest too. We don't have time for lies when winter is 7 months long. This is good lesson for anywhere, not just Yakutia. You think about this, about the cultural effects of environmental extremes. In places where survival is difficult, social structures tend toward pragmatism rather than posturing. There's less tolerance for incompetence or dishonesty because the stakes are too high. The cold is a harsh teacher, but an effective one, and it shapes not just individual behavior but entire cultures. The gathering continues late into the night, late by village standards, anyway, which means past 10 p.m. Eventually people begin leaving, bundling up and venturing into the cold for their journeys home, some only meters away, others farther across the village. You help clean up, a collective effort that takes maybe 15 minutes with many hands working together. Walking back to your host family's house through the cold. It's minus 63 degrees Celsius tonight, practically balmy. You find yourself reflecting on the entire experience. The outhouse maintenance that seems so impossibly difficult, so degrading, so far beyond your capabilities, has become just another task. An unpleasant task, certainly, one you'll be happy to stop doing when you return to your normal life with its invisible plumbing. But no longer impossible, no longer terrifying. You've learned that humans are more capable than they think, that the boundaries of the possible are farther out than comfortable modern life suggests. You've learned that every convenience has a cost, paid by someone somewhere, whether that's maintenance workers you never see or environmental impacts you ignore. You've learned that different doesn't mean inferior. The Saka way of life isn't primitive or backward, just optimized for different conditions than the ones you're accustomed to. And you've learned, perhaps most importantly, that character isn't something you have or don't have. It's something you build through repeated exposure to difficulty, through choosing to engage with challenges rather than avoiding them, through doing unglamorous necessary work even when no one's watching and no one will applaud. The outhouse sits there in the darkness, 50 meters from the house, a small wooden structure that's become weirdly significant to your understanding of yourself and the world. Next week, it'll be your turn again to maintain it, to venture into the cold and do the necessary work. And you'll do it competently now, without terror, just another task in the ongoing work of maintaining human life in an environment that doesn't particularly want humans. The cold is honest, as the grandmother said. And perhaps you've become a bit more honest too with yourself about what you're capable of, about what matters, about the difference between comfort and capability. These are lessons you couldn't have learned in comfort, which is perhaps the point. Some knowledge requires discomfort to acquire. Some growth requires stress to trigger. You reach the house, climb the porch steps, and open the door. The warmth inside welcomes you back, and you step through the threshold from the hostile environment into human space. Tomorrow will bring other challenges, other tasks, other opportunities to build character through unglamorous work. But tonight, you're warm, safe, and part of a community that has mastered the art of living, not just surviving, in one of the harshest environments on Earth. The outhouse is clean, the household functions, life continues, and you've learned that you're stronger than you thought, more adaptable than you knew, and capable of more than comfort ever taught you. These lessons will stay with you long after you leave Yakutia, long after you return to a life where toilets flush and waste disappears and you never have to think about outhouse maintenance at -71 degrees Celsius. Character built, lesson learned, and somehow, impossibly, gratitude for the experience. And now, as our journey through the frozen darkness comes to a close, let your breathing slow, let the tension drain from your shoulders. You've traveled with someone across 50 meters of -71 degrees Celsius cold, witnessed the unglamorous work that keeps humans alive in impossible places, and learned that strength isn't the absence of difficulty. It's the willingness to engage with it honestly. The Saka people sleep now in their elevated houses, warm and safe, knowing tomorrow will bring more cold, more work, more challenges. But they sleep peacefully, because they've done this for centuries and they'll do it for centuries more. The cold is honest, and they've learned to be honest in return. Let that honesty settle into your own rest now. Let the images fade, the frozen formations, the wooden paddle, the candlelight dancing on frost-covered walls. Let yourself sink into warmth and safety, grateful for both the adventure you've taken and the comfort you're experiencing now. The outhouse stands in the darkness, doing its simple work, maintained by people who understand that dignity comes from engagement, not avoidance. And you, wherever you are, in whatever temperature surrounds you, can rest knowing that humans are capable of extraordinary adaptation, that character is built through unglamorous work, and that even the coldest environments can't freeze the human capacity to live fully, love deeply, and laugh at the absurdity of cleaning frozen toilets under the northern lights. Sleep now, dream of warmer things, and remember that somewhere in Yakutia, at -71 degrees Celsius, life continues, resilient and honest and impossibly strong. Sweet dreams.